You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, David.
Hello, Will.
And hello, listeners. Welcome to episode 231 of the Common Descent Podcast. This episode, we are talking about secondarily aquatic vertebrates
Yes, vertebrate animals that went back to the water.
that missed being wet and getting to swim.
Tired of being in the sun.
Yeah, I feel it. I get it.
This is whales, seals, sea turtles, all of the things that went out of their way to evolve to be great at living on land and then decided they were having none of it.
Decided it was overrated and Tiktaalik made a terrible mistake.
Yes, it was only a fish.
These were, if you've seen the meme of people being like, I know who to blame for all of my problems, and then it's a picture of Tiktaalik.
Yes.
These were the first ones who had that feeling. These were the first vertebrates. In this episode, we will discuss what it means to be secondarily aquatic, what it takes, the adaptations, the difficulties, the challenges to going back to a life in the water, as well as how we recognize it in the fossil record and what evolutionary trends we tend to see in the evolution of secondarily aquatic features. This will be a ton of fun with a bunch of cool examples, and we are discussing it because it was requested quite a bit. We got requests for this topic from Hans, Matthew, Anna, Richard, Drew, and Teoranosaurus.
Thank you, everybody.
Good requests. Before we get into our discussion and before we get to the news, some quick announcements. As always, we have a Patreon. Our Patreon and the support from our patrons helps us keep this podcast running from top to bottom. It lets us do all the cool things we do, helps us keep our lights on, and allows us to explore all the cool new things we've been exploring this year and hope to continue to explore. If you sign up with us, you can not only support all of that, but also get some extra goodies, extra episodes, bonus gifts, live streams with us. And at certain levels, you can get your name shouted out here on the podcast. And this episode, we'd like to welcome Alex and Kevin.
Welcome and thank you to all of our patrons. This year has been a big, exciting year. We went to Dragon Con again. We just wrapped up spooky season. We've already announced some exciting stuff coming up next year. We also launched a spin-off podcast this year in Leave It to Us. All of that made possible by the incredible support of our patrons and all of our listeners who keep those numbers up in the back end of the podcast.
This was also the year of the museum meetups, which was only capable because of all of you.
We had those cost money.
Yes.
That cost money for us to get places.
Yep. So thank you to everyone. If you would like to sign up to get your name shouted out or to submit questions, which will be answered at the end of the episode, you can. If you have questions that you want answered in a different way, you can go put them into the end of the year Q&A form, which is currently still open.
Yes, that is open until the end of November. You can find the link on our website. Also, follow the links down below. We will answer as many questions as we can within some number of hours of answering questions. So go submit one.
So let us know what you want to know from us, and keep your ears out at the end of the year for that just chonker of an episode. And speaking of lovely contributions from our lovely listeners, we got some mail because we have a mailing address. So if you're ever interested to send us some physical goodies, you can find that address down in the description and on our website. We got mail from Logan, who sent us a really awesome gift, in my opinion, with a note that said, I don't know if y'all are into this. Logan, you don't know how into this I am. Logan sent us the Star Wars Bestiary Volume 1, which is just a tome of Star Wars creatures with really fantastic art. I'm so excited. I have the old Star Wars field guide book, so now I get to have the updated and new edition of Star Wars creature knowledge. So I'm so excited to read through this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To answer Logan's question of whether or not you're into it, this book can go on your shelf next to your other Star Wars bestiary book.
Yep.
This one's got like stuff from the sequels and the more
Yeah.
recent TV shows.
It's got a bunch of like animated stuff like Clone Wars and
Cool.
Rebels and stuff. Like it's got stuff from the Jedi Fallen Order video games and stuff. Like
oh, cool.
it's pulling from everywhere. And it's got some creatures from the field guide, so I get to see what they say in the new one.
Oh, neat. Thank you, Logan, for that very generous gift. Will enjoy that quite a lot.
It's so cool.
And I'll hear about it.
Oh, yeah. And with our announcements out of the way, we can get into our first section, the news. Every episode, we like to gather some recent scientific news and research so that we can all stay up to date on what's going on in the world of paleontology, evolutionary biology, and earth sciences. David, what is your news?
My first bit of news is about secondarily aquatic vertebrates.
Excellent!
I'm keeping us on theme. Specifically, a very early community of secondarily aquatic vertebrates from right after the Permian mass extinction.
Ooh.
This is research published in Science by Aubrey Roberts et al. And in the blog post, we'll put a link to a press release by James Ashworth at the Natural History Museum website. There has been lots of research over the years into the recovery after the Permian mass extinction. This was about 252 million years ago, the biggest mass extinction event that we know of in Earth history. And so there has been lots of question about how did things go after that? And there has been research that has found in the oceans, invertebrates seem to have recovered relatively quickly. Right, invertebrate communities bounced back, in a few million years. But not as much information is known about the vertebrates, the bony animals. In the oceans, there's been some conflicting information from different fossil sites, which has left open the question of just how well they recovered in the millions of years following the extinction. This paper describes a newly discovered bone bed containing lots of marine vertebrates from the early part of the Triassic, about 249 million years ago. So 3 million years after the mass extinction. This is a site that was discovered in 2014. And I think this was in the press release, they describe it as a very difficult excavation because the site is located on a mountain in the Arctic Circle. This site is located on the island of Spitsbergen, which is in the Svalbard archipelago. It is on a mountain on an island in the Arctic Circle, so it was tough to work on.
Oof.
So here we are 10 years later. The researchers estimate that the total site contains more than 30,000 fossils, including bones, teeth, and coprolites, so poops. And all of these fossils present a surprisingly complex ecosystem of ocean vertebrate animals. Cool. This bone bed includes the remains of a variety of fish. There are coelacanths, lungfish, various ray-finned fish, and sharks. So all your major important groups. There are very small fish, including things like conodonts. There are also ammonites, which seem to have provided a diversity at what would have been the bottom of the food chain. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Then you have larger predators like larger fish, marine reptiles, including some cousins of ichthyosaurs and various lineages of reptiles that were making their way back into the sea. Some of these predators were durophagous. They were specialized shell crushers, including some of the sharks and at least one species of marine reptile. And Symbospondylus, which is an early ichthyosaur, was a particularly large predator that probably was at the top of this food chain.
Cool.
So just 3 million years after the Permian extinction, you have this pretty complex food web. And in addition to these fish and secondarily aquatic ocean tetrapods, there are also temnospondyls, which are ancient amphibians, which are interesting because those are not often found alongside marine reptiles and other ocean dwellers. So these might have been living on the shoreline or maybe occasionally going out into the ocean waters. But yet one more piece of this diverse community at this time in the early Cretaceous. And based on how complex this ecosystem is, the researchers are able to make estimates about when would this have started happening? Like how
Yeah.
early would you have had the beginnings of complex marine ecosystems among vertebrates? And they estimate probably within 1 million years after the Permian extinction, you started to see these complex food webs. And certainly by 3 million in this area, you had essentially fully formed food webs with multiple layers of trophic levels, with specialized types of predators. So it seems marine vertebrates, like invertebrates, also recovered fairly quickly, at least in some areas. They do point out in the paper that some of the evidence that has made us question this has been from other parts of the world where recovery might have been slower. So their plan is to, for starters, continue looking at this site since they've only touched a small percentage of what's actually at this site, and also to look for other sites in this same region, in the Svalbard archipelago, to see, are we getting that same signal from all across this region? And then, hopefully in the future, be able to compare it with sites from other parts of the world. Maybe the Arctic region rebounded very quickly and other places didn't. We'll have to see.
Neat. That's very cool. It's both like super interesting that things bounce back, but also part of me feels like animals are going to jump on that opportunity as quickly as possible to try to fill in those spaces left open after extinction like that. And that extinction was so vast and devastating that I wonder if there is any merit to the idea of, was it almost easier for them to fill things in because it was more empty than it would have been?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because on the other hand, there's the question, were things so devastated
Yeah.
that even if you were around to recover, the ecosystem couldn't support any sort of recovery?
Yes,
But on the
exactly.
other hand, there is that point that no one lives here anymore. So
Exactly.
if you can, it's easy to make a living there.
Yeah, it's if you move into a ghost town, you can move into any house you want,
Yes.
and you can set up shop exactly the way you could possibly dream to. Yeah, because I'd always assumed the
Yeah.
previous of, yeah, things must have been so brutalized that it took
Right. If
forever.
if in your ghost town the well is dried up and all the
Yes.
croplands are poisoned, then it doesn't matter how many houses are open.
Yeah, if Sherman
You're
had
not going
come
to live
through
there.
beforehand and salted the fields, then
Yes.
you're in trouble. So interesting. Very
Yeah.
cool. My first bit of news is also dealing with semi-aquatic animals, or at least semi-aquatic group. This is about crocodilian eggs from Australia that are the oldest known in Australia.
Oh, cool.
This is research by Xavier Panades y Blas et al. In the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, and the article is from BBC.com by Lana Lamb. This study is looking at some preserved eggshells from Australia, specifically southeastern Queensland, that seem to be crocodilian eggshells and are the oldest known in Australia now, which is exciting because we don't get a lot of eggshell, egg fossils are delicate and rare to begin with, but also we don't get a lot from Australia and from crocodilians. So, an exciting addition, especially because during the time that these eggshells are from is during the reign of the Mecasuchian crocodilians, which were a group of Australian crocs that showed up in the Eocene and lasted until quite recently, and included a diversity of very just crocs, semi-aquatic swimming crocs, but also have some more terrestrial members like the famous quincana, which seems to
Hmm.
have been a land-based predator. These eggshells date to 55 million years old, so we're going back toward the beginning of their reign in Australia. These eggshells have features that make them stand out among all known crocodilomorph eggshells that we are aware of. So they have a suite of egg features. I don't know what those features are specifically because they didn't go to detail on the abstract or the article, but they stand out from any other crocodilomorph egg that we have currently recognized. Sounds like fossil or modern, so it is a new type of croc egg, which is very cool. We do also potentially have a hint of whose eggs it could be because there are two species of Mecasuchian crocodilians found in these deposits quite regularly. They're both species in the genus Cumbara, and currently there are no other crocodilians known from the deposits. So likely it is one of these croc's eggs. Could be one of theirs or either, both species even potentially. And so this is hopefully going to help give some information about these species reproduction and features of their eggs and young. That's most of the study. One thing I wanted to talk about was the title for the article, and one of the things you'll see for this news is them saying eggs of drop crocs are found,
Yes.
which evidently just came from the interview of them mentioning the fact that some Mecasuchians are terrestrial, some of them are hunting probably on land, some show signs of potentially being somewhat arboreal, going up into trees, which, has been known. And the suggestion that one of the ways they could be hunting might be like a jaguar and falling from the trees onto prey, and
Sure.
therefore the term drop crocs. But the news says evidence of ancient tree climbing drop crocs found in Australia, which is not what this research
Right.
was.
I saw the headline for that, and then I also read. I don't know if I read a little bit of it or if I looked at the art, but I saw the headline and I saw that it was about croc eggs that
Mhm.
were found, and I had a moment of wondering: did they find croc eggs in a tree? Like, are these somehow like fossilized within a fossil tree or something? I guess I'll wait to find out. That does make more sense. That this is
Yes.
the idea of the crocs dropping out of trees like drop bears is several degrees removed from what the actual study is about.
Yes. It sounds like during the interview, while explaining what Mecasuchian crocs were, they threw out some of these examples of the
Right.
diversity, and some key words got grabbed onto.
This is one of those situations where I have to wonder. It feels to me like ancient land croc eggs would have done the job
Yes.
as a
Yep.
headline. I feel like
Yeah.
that would have gotten enough attention. I don't think that the drop crocs step was a necessary length to go to.
Yep. And this is one of those where I don't know. Like, I pulled up the wiki for Kumbara, and the only image they have is a jaw and a skull. So I
Mm,
don't know that we know how terrestrial these species even were. So these
right.
might have just been crocs.
Right. Just
Just
living the way that we think of crocs in Australia today.
yeah. So there is all likelihood. The skull to my quick eye does not look like the typical tall, definitely terrestrial. Maybe a little bit more tall, so maybe it was a little more terrestrial, but
Right.
also we don't know this was a wolf croc.
Yes. Very cool, though, to find croc eggs in the fossil record
Yes.
because they don't, again, as we've mentioned before, these aren't like dinosaur eggs. They're
Mm-mm.
not hard shelled. We get almost all of the fossilized vertebrate eggs in the fossil record are dinosaurs, including
Yes.
birds, because they leave these lovely hard shelled eggs. Crocs do not.
Yeah.
Like crocs and turtles and lizards, they have more leathery eggs and therefore much rarer in the fossil record.
Yeah, so this is very exciting. I'd also love to talk to them to learn like what are the features of a croc egg that lets you know, ooh, this is a new kind of croc egg. Like,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Well, speaking of ancient archosaur reproduction, I have a news about dinosaur sex and the potential evidence it leaves on the skeleton.
Excellent.
This is research by Filippo Bertozzo et al. In the journal iScience, and in the blog post, we'll have a link to an article on CNN by Ashley Strickland. Over the years, some researchers who are involved in this study noticed a unusual pattern of injuries in certain dinosaurs. Specifically, hadrosaurs, so your duck-billed, quote unquote, herbivorous dinosaurs that had injuries to their tails. And the
Mm.
researchers kept noticing this and saying, this seems like a very consistent injury that probably has some sort of shared origin. This study, they analyzed over 500 specimens of vertebrae from adult hadrosaurs, including multiple different genera, multiple species from various parts of the world across the end of the Cretaceous, so the Campanian and Maastrichtian. So diverse in geography, phylogeny, and time, and found a very consistent pattern. That vertebrae in the close half of the tail, so closer to the butt, right? That's sort of the middle to the beginning part of the tail, consistently had injuries on the spines of the vertebrae. So the projection, the neural spine that sticks off the top of the vertebrae. Most of these injuries were on the very tips of these spines. They were often tilted or swollen or broken, typically also with signs of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And typically the damage was spread across several adjacent vertebrae. So this wasn't like one vertebra that was injured. It would be a row of vertebrae in this part of the tail. The top of the vertebrae were injured. If I remember correctly, in the paper, they mentioned that they looked at 500 and something adult hadrosaur examples, and all but like 3 of them had this. This was an extremely consistent pattern. This consistency suggests a common cause. In the paper, they do a whole lot of discussion about what are some potential answers. They talk about things like predator attacks or combat between these dinosaurs. They suggest that those are probably unlikely, especially predator attacks, because A, that is unusually consistent for a predator attack.
Yeah.
And also, this isn't the best part of the body for a predator to attack, and there aren't bite marks and stuff. It's just an injury. There doesn't seem to be other signs of predation. They also did a biomechanical analysis. They created digital models of hadrosaur vertebrae and then digitally subjected them to different types of stress to analyze how the vertebrae react. And what they found is the pattern of injury on the actual vertebrae matches what you would expect from a deforming force, something pressing upon those vertebrae. So their suggestion is that what seems to be probably the most likely cause of this is one hadrosaur climbing on top of another hadrosaur.
Yeah, not just something, but someone.
Someone. And because it is on the base of the tail, that is where you would expect a hadrosaur to climb on top of another hadrosaur during mating.
Mm-hmm.
Partially supporting this idea is that all of the examples that they saw this in are adult specimens. They also looked at hundreds of juvenile specimens and did not find these injuries. I think there were like 3 examples of some that were maybe juveniles, like maybe older juveniles, but almost 100% this was just in adults, which does seem to support this idea that this might have been sex related. If this is accurate, it A is insights into how these dinosaurs were doing it, but also they propose in the paper a potential way to identify the sex of a dinosaur.
Yep.
If this is the dinosaur, having another dinosaur climb on top of it.
Very cool. That makes all the sense, and it feels so obvious that this is a thing we could be looking for and have been looking for, but I would not have thought of it until it was mentioned and then went, oh, yep, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, there are some questions, right? There are some sort of, not necessarily counterpoints, but they do point out in the paper that this, so far, only seems to be apparent in hadrosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
This pattern has not been noticed in other dinosaur groups, including other ornithopods like iguanodon and close relatives of hadrosaurs. That could be something to do with their anatomy. It could be their behavior was different. It could also be we just haven't looked enough at other dinosaurs. I think they talked about sauropods having been examined for this. And it could be that other dinosaurs just weren't climbing on top of each other, right?
Yes.
That they were employing other means. It could also be that this is something a little bit different about their anatomy. And then my big sort of question about this that I was this paper is open access, so I was able to go through it, and I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't much talk about this. I love the idea, the interpretation that this is from hadrosaurs climbing on top of each other. The suggestion that this could be linked to the sex of the dinosaur feels a little more suspect to me, because in many animals that are around today, it is not just males climbing on top of females.
Yes.
You get these sort of behaviors, these mounting behaviors, as part of various displays, dogs do this, right?
Yes.
This is why dogs, you have to stop them from jumping on top of each other, because they're trying to establish, who's in control here. There is a single line, as far as I saw, I might have missed something, but as far as I could tell, there was a single line in the paper that addresses this, and it says, this is a potential, but this behavior is very rare in nature, and then doesn't go into it any further than that, which I do feel like is something that could be explored more in depth. That finding this pattern of injury certainly is not enough to say this was a female hadrosaur. Also interesting that almost all of the adults that they found had these injuries.
Yeah.
And if it was something that was only happening to ones, even if females were way more common than males, like we see in a lot of living species, you'd still potentially expect that this wasn't universal among these dinosaurs. So that is, and the idea of hadrosaurs, like two males getting into a fight and one climbing on top of the other to establish the pecking order, makes tons of sense.
Yes. Well, and the other question that I would like to know, which this isn't necessarily like refuting anything, do we have modern examples of this kind of spinal injury?
Yeah.
Are there do elephants that are, big heavy animals that do mount each other?
Elephants, rhinos.
Yeah, like I know we've seen injuries from mating of falling off and cracking a rib or stomping on each other's toes and stuff. Do we see pressure related stress injuries on the bones in any modern animals? Because if not, then it doesn't mean this couldn't be that, but it would mean that it might that we don't have a direct analog to compare it to.
Yeah, and again, the fact that this hasn't been noticed in other groups of dinosaurs
Mm-hmm.
does make me wonder if hadrosaurs specifically were doing something unusual.
Yeah.
Like, were they jumping on each other for some reason?
Or were they one of those animals that for some reason have very long mating bouts? Like,
Sure.
instead of hopping up, getting it done, and then hopping off, they were, supporting each other's weight for like hours, and stresses were building up.
It could also be, and this is something that I don't think we see in a lot of big animals today, but it could also be that it was more of a violent behavior.
Yes,
among
absolutely.
hadrosaurs. That's something we see in a number of species today, where mating is something that usually the male is initiating mating in these cases, and they're having to subdue their potential mate.
Yes. Or maybe they're fighting against others and trying to hop on before another rival gets there.
Which is also something that we see in a number of species today. So it could be that these injuries are not just incidental, that this was a more forceful behavior for one reason or another.
Very interesting.
Or drop crocs.
Yes.
Coming out of the trees, landing on hadrosaur butts.
Giddy up! Yeah! Stop it!
And that's not where you want to ride a hadrosaur. That's why they were getting injured. You got to sit in the back.
Yes.
You don't sit on the tail.
Crocs were never meant to truly be in trees that much, so they did not have the best aim. Well, my next news, I have no idea how to segue it, is about how some poop-eating beetles began eating meat.
Tails close to the butt makes poop, but also made of meat.
There we go. There we
I
go.
did it
It's
for you.
all
It's
coming
like playing
together.
connections.
This is research by Liliana Cantil et al. In Paleontology, and the article is by Taylor Mitchell Brown in Science. So, this research was looking at a phenomena that happened among a number of groups of dung beetles, which are beetles in the scarab beetle group that roll up, poo or do other, dig burrows in the dung or things like that and feed off of it. Usually their larvae are mainly the ones feeding off of it. A number of lineages of dung beetles at some point in their history shifted to being necrophagous, eating dead bodies instead of eating feces. This study is focusing on South America, where the greatest number of necrophagous beetles are found. So this is a hot spot for corpse-eating beetles. When they adopted this, though, has been under debate, and that's what this research is trying to look into. The prevailing hypothesis, the common thought, is that it evolved somewhere between 130,000 to 12,000 years ago down in South America, somewhere around the time that we start to see the dwindling and extinction of the mega herbivores that were found in South America, the big plant eaters that would have been producing most of the dung that the beetles would have been subsisting off of. As we get toward the end of that time frame, we get toward our megafaunal extinctions where we start losing most of the big herbivores. And the thought was that as those food sources, as those dung producers died out, the beetles had to find alternate sources and started switching, at least some of them, to necrophagy. Others, though, have taken issue with this hypothesis because the disappearance of the megafauna is a fairly recent event in Earth history.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that happened not too long ago. And for a dung beetle to shift from a diet of plant-based dung to a diet of meat takes a lot of adaptations that they don't think there would be enough time for that to happen and us have the diversity that we have now. So, to look into it, they looked at some trace fossils because when dung beetles and these necrophagous beetles gather up the material that they're going to feed to their babies, they often gather it up into a brood chamber. They burrow and create a brood ball out of the dung, the famous dung balls, but also they will do that with meat. They'll roll up some meat and take it to their young, and they will create these chambers where they then lay the eggs, and the young are able to feed on the meal their parents have provided. There are trace fossils of these chambers.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in episode 30, that
Mm-hmm.
there are fossil dung beetle dung balls.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about fossil dung beetle meatballs.
Yes, and so it sounds like the ball itself isn't preserved in these trace fossils, but the
Mm-hmm.
chamber they would have been in is preserved, infilled and stuff.
Oh.
So we have the chamber that they dug, and you can tell which kind of beetle built the chamber because the chambers have different structures.
Okay.
So like dung beetle burrows have an outer structure and an inner chamber where the larvae feed, while necrophagous beetles have a chamber with a protuberance, a bulge in the outer wall, which is where the larvae perch and hang down from to feed on the meat. There are two particular ichnofossils, trace fossils of these burrows that they were looking at, both of which are attributed to necrophagous scarab beetles, previously dung beetles. They looked at these to try to figure out the timing of diversification of necrophagous beetles. They looked at 5,340 fossilized brood chambers.
That's a lot of poop balls.
That's a lot, and in this case, a lot of meatballs.
Yep.
These are from 9 different formations across Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and Ecuador, spanning 50 million years, so from the Eocene to the late Pleistocene. They also, during all of this, documented new records of these trace fossils in a number of sites.
Cool.
Which is always great. They found necrophagous brood chambers dating as far back as 37.7 million years ago in Patagonia. which shows that a shift to necrophagy happened well before the herbivores were starting to go extinct or even
Yeah.
diminishing.
That's a lot of mega herbivore extinctions ago.
Yes. So does not seem like it is like the initial shift was linked to the more recent extinctions, and that this specifically was at a time when grassland habitats were widespread in this area and mega herbivores were widespread in this area, meaning that these beetles switched to meat eating when there should have been plenty of dung around
Mhm.
for them to be eating. So it refutes the like megafaunal extinction triggered hypothesis, and that they were triggered by a lack of dung resource.
Right.
This also lines up with other analysis that looked at genomes of 74 scarab beetles and suggested that the necrophagous beetles should have emerged around 35 to 40 million years ago. So this lines up very nicely with those estimates. The new hypothesis is that during this time of abundant herbivores and abundant herbivore dung, that what likely was a bigger driver for them to switch to necrophagy was an over amount of competition with other dung beetles.
Yeah. In fact, there was not enough dung to go around, but not
Yes,
because of a lack of dung.
because there were so many other dung beetles trying to get to it that there was a benefit to start to broaden one's diet and shift to other sources. And this would mean that during this shift, we would have seen a new dynamic show up of herbivores feeding dung beetles while alive, and then these necrophagous beetles after they die. And it seems like this was a successful strategy because we see a number of bursts of diversity. We see the first one in the middle Miocene. We see another one in the Pleistocene. And so the beetles were then successful over time and diversified a number of times. There were other times where they struggled more at the late Miocene when things got a bit colder and the environments they were surviving in became a bit stressed. But it seems that this was a shift that happened quite a while ago and for different reasons than we had been presuming.
I really enjoy a case like this where one hypothesis is potentially supplanted by another, where both of the hypotheses make perfect sense on paper.
Absolutely.
It just happens to be that it was the other one. I also think that it's really interesting to note that last bit that you mentioned, that in times where the beetles seem to have diminished, it probably wasn't necessarily directly related to their food sources. It was a climatological thing, that it's always so tempting to look for one cause
Yes.
of success or diminishing. It's their food or their competition or whatnot. But an ecosystem is a complex thing, and so it is very
Absolutely.
rarely that it works out. That was when early on you said there has been some questioning of this idea that the megafaunal extinctions led to this diversification of necrophagous beetles, and my first thought was I question it if only because it's a little too neat and tidy
Mhm.
of a hypothesis. And things in nature are rarely that neat and tidy.
Well, the first question that came to mind is it does seem a little weird to suggest that a losing of diversity would shift you to wanting to eat more animals.
Mm-hmm.
Of Now there are fewer big herbivores for you to feed off of when they die, so it to be beneficial to shift to necrophagy during that time.
Yeah. Also, I've never thought about this before, but somehow the idea of a dung beetle rolling up a ball of meat is grosser than a ball of dung.
Oh, there's a great video of one turning a rat into a meatball, just slowly pushing, folding, and molding a rat into a furry meatball and then burying it in the chamber.
That's so much worse than poop.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I don't know why. Listeners, weigh in if you agree or disagree. We'll have a nice, lively chat about it in the Discord. Whether you think meatballs or poop balls are grosser. Like, I would eat a meatball certainly before I ate a poop ball, but not
Yes.
one that a dung beetle had made.
No, no.
And in fact, I might consider going for the poop ball, if it was dung beetles. This is a choice I hope never to have to make.
it's just a milk dud. It's just a milk dud. It's just a milk dud.
Just plants. It's just a grassy milk dud.
Well, speaking of major shifts in lifestyle, I guess. Let's move away from these discussions of poop and meatballs and talk about how one can return to the water. What do you need to do to become a mermaid, and how tough is it?
So, in this episode, we are talking about aquatic vertebrates, but specifically secondarily aquatic vertebrates. Will, what does it mean to be secondarily aquatic?
So, the term secondarily aquatic refers to the fact that our ancestors, tetrapod ancestors, came from the sea. So, a group of fish evolved and to slowly start coming onto land and gave rise to the first four-limbed animals, tetrapods. A number of members of tetrapods have gone back to the water and are therefore secondarily aquatic instead of primarily aquatic, which are fish.
Yes. It's kind of in the same way that all flightless birds are secondarily flightless.
Exactly.
Because most vertebrates are flightless, and bird ancestors could not fly. They evolved the ability to fly, and then some of them went back and lost it again. It is a secondary acquisition of something that was present in your ancestors.
And you'll see overlap between secondarily aquatic and semi-aquatic, and often one is kind of a stepping stone to the other. Semi-aquatic refers to spending a good amount of time in the water, but still coming onto land and needing to come onto land is one of the key aspects. Spending a good amount of time in the water and having adaptations for being in the water, but requiring the land to still survive.
Right. Something like penguins. While we're still on the bird line, right? Penguins are very well adapted for moving around in the water, but they cannot stay in the water all the time.
Yes. Most turtles, your pond turtles, still need to come out to lay their eggs and to bask and sun themselves. Crocodilians, for the same reasons, are semi-aquatic.
Yep. Water snakes are semi-aquatic snakes.
Yes, indeed. So, and this is one of those terms where as you move further down, the edge blurs because sea turtles need to come ashore to lay their eggs. But no one considers them semi-aquatic because that's the only thing they have to come on land to do.
Right. I wouldn't even call them semi-terrestrial.
No.
Because they're not even good at being on land. They're kind of forced to go on land occasionally.
Exactly. Seals often get this kind of comparison where they do need to come on land, but they are bad at being on land. They are absolutely best in the water, which is an alligator is not as graceful on land as it is in the water, but it can get around just fine on land.
Yeah, so semi-aquatic, there is really a spectrum. Because, again, bats can swim.
Yes,
basically, all vertebrates are capable of moving in the water. I can swim. I am absolutely not an aquatic animal.
Yes.
So where we draw the line is another one of those sort of arbitrary choices.
So you'll see different, semi-aquatic and aquatic. There's also a distinction to be made between aquatic and marine, which is kind of the Super Saiyan final form of being aquatic. That now you
Super
are
Saiyan blue, in fact.
Yes, exactly. That you are in the ocean. You might not even touch land again.
Right, because there are lots of vertebrates that live in freshwater.
Yes.
Ponds and rivers, and often those tend to be semi-aquatic.
Because it's kind of hard to avoid the land when you're in freshwater. There are big lakes out there where you can be quite aquatic, but most of them are not that big. Most of them, you're going to be encountering the land, so it's useful to be semi-aquatic.
Right. Marine is you live in the ocean.
Yeah. the land is nowhere to be seen.
And most marine tetrapods are open ocean animals.
Yes.
So, like, you might not even see land.
Yeah. You could almost, like, I'd say live and die, but like a lot of whales give birth in like shallow areas because that's the safer.
Right.
But you could go 90% of your life without ever looking at land the whole time.
Without any interactions with the crust.
Yes,
You're just
exactly.
in the ocean.
And that is a lot of things that talk about secondarily aquatic animals will often focus on the marine versions
Right.
because that is the most extreme and the where we see the heaviest and most obvious trends in that evolution.
Yes. I assume that also our discussion today will largely be about tetrapods that have gone fully back into the water.
Because it's the coolest version. Like,
Yeah.
it's the coolest. That being said, though, I did find one paper that broke it down talking about the fact that though marine aquatic tetrapods, and this is also good to note, most things when they're talking about secondarily aquatic tetrapods are actually talking about secondarily aquatic amniotes, reptiles and
Yes.
mammals,
Yes.
because it is arguable whether or not amphibians can be counted as secondarily aquatic because it's hard to really confirm that their ancestors were ever not semi-aquatic.
Yeah, amphibians got semi-aquatic at best
Yes,
for the most
exactly.
part. So, yeah, they were always tied to the water.
And so your ones that are fully aquatic, where both the adult and juvenile live their entire lives in the water. It's one of those of like, all right, but how much did you really go back, or did you just take a step backwards, not evolve a new way of being?
Mhm.
The other thing, though, I found that was noted was when you're looking at like semi-aquatic examples, the vast majority are freshwater and brackish water. That most examples of semi-aquatic tetrapods are going to be in freshwater, brackish water. So the portion that have made it to the ocean are still the smaller portion, but
Right.
are very famous and quite diverse compared to some of the semi-aquatic examples, which we can talk about later. But there is an interesting
Yeah.
trend there.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of semi-aquatic ocean animals.
Mm-mm.
That's not really how it works most of the time.
Yeah.
You're either in the ocean or you're not.
Yes, you commit or you don't.
Yeah, especially among vertebrates.
Yeah.
Well, we've already started hinting at some of this, and we absolutely are not going to list every example. But while we're discussing the diversity of this, let's mention some of our favorite examples of secondarily aquatic tetrapods.
One of the groups that gets me the most, and we will definitely talk about this throughout the episode, but are birds. And
Yeah.
birds get less attention than like the mammals and other reptiles that have gone back. But the idea of like penguins, but you also get things like Hesperornis, which was a foot swimmer that are adapted to be in the ocean, is it's such an extreme of land to sky to sea.
Yes.
That is really crazy.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about how many different groups have done this, right?
Hmm.
That birds have done it. There are multiple lineages of birds that have become largely aquatic. There are a bunch of reptiles. I mean, we've talked across the podcast a whole bunch of times in the past that there are three famous groups of marine reptiles from the Mesozoic era, and that's just the famous ones.
Which was really nice while taking notes for this because I meant I did not have to worry about talking about them too much because it's like, go listen to those. We did an episode for each of those.
We sure did.
We've done an episode for most of the big, like we even did the marine crocs. So like those details are over there.
I do have I have a soft spot for some reason for turtles. I
Yeah.
think that marine, like sea turtles, and also of course the pig-nosed turtles, which
Mhm.
are highly specialized freshwater turtles, which is very, very cool.
Turtle, and we'll get into this. Turtles also have had to do it in a unique way because of their anatomy. They are doing it
Yeah.
very different than most others who go back to the water, which is very cool. This episode, we're definitely going to be focusing more on vertebrates. I did find one cool bug example. There's lots of aquatic bugs that have,
Sure.
become and they're mostly freshwater. I don't actually know of any saltwater examples off the top of my head, but the giant water bugs evidently are the largest true bugs.
Oh.
They're the largest hemipterans, and so that's cool, which is
That
another
is
trend
cool.
that we'll talk about. Things get big when they go into water, evidently including bugs.
Very cool. Yeah, again, we're mostly going to be talking about vertebrates
Mhm.
because we got to limit it somehow. But yeah, lots of other groups of animals have done secondarily aquatic. So have plants. There
Yes.
are seagrasses are like
Mhm.
the big famous example. Plants evolved on land, much
Mhm.
like tetrapods. The evolution of plants is them coming up out of the sea, and seagrasses are a major group that has gone back to being aquatic. So there are secondarily aquatic examples in many different lineages of life.
And if you're thinking right now of like there's a lot of plants in the water. Most of those are algae. Most of those
Yes.
are like kelp and stuff is not a land plant. That is a ocean plant, the ocean plant cousin. True
Hmm.
plants started on the land and some have gone back to the water. And you get lots of things like water lilies and stuff that are specialized water plants.
Yes. Well, we will for sure talk more about different cool examples as we go. For now, let's move into talking about what makes it so fascinating that animals, particularly that vertebrates, have managed to do this. So, when we did episode 77, we talked about the evolution of fish into tetrapods, and we talked a
Mhm.
bit about the challenges of building a fish to survive the challenges of being on land. Now let's go the other way. What are some of the problems that a tetrapod has becoming an aquatic species?
So the big issue that comes up is you're now having to move through a new medium. So
Hmm.
fish, it was now you have to deal with gravity and breathing in air. Here, you're now having to move through something that's much thicker than air, and the the limbs you were using to move around on land are no longer going to be efficient. The things they're dealing with are many of the same things that you're going to be dealing with if you're building a boat: drag, buoyancy, and stabilization, things like that. Being able to move efficiently through the water, keep yourself steady and maneuver and keep yourself in at the point in the water that you want to be, the
Hmm.
depth you want to be at. Drag is one of these big things. This is the force of the water pulling against the body, either due to friction or to pressure differentials, things like that.
Right. This is it's like the air resistance
Yes.
when you took physics class in high school and every problem that you were asked to solve said, let's pretend that air resistance doesn't exist
Yep.
because that is way too complicated for your high school physics problems. This is a problem in the water. It's water resistance, and they can't just ignore it.
Yes, and water's way thicker than air. So, in if you're wanting to fly, you have to worry about air resistance. If you're just living on land, like a cheetah does not need to be aerodynamic the way a bird does, cuz you're never going to be moving fast enough to really have to worry about it, so it's not an issue. In water, if you want to move at all, it's an issue.
Yes. Yeah, water, the best demonstration of the difference in density between air and water is doing a belly flop.
Yep. Yep.
That'll really drive it home.
Oh yeah, you can belly flop on air all you want. You do it all the way into belly flopping on the water, and you're
Yes.
fine. There are some easy tools that come up very regularly among aquatic animals. Streamlined bodies.
Sure.
That's a very shape yourself a bit more like a fish. That's usually going to be a smooth surface with broader front, tapered back, because that
Hmm.
allows the water to flow off and not create as much pressure differential. Specialized skin adaptations, things like losing your fur to make smooth skin, losing scales to make smooth skin. Also, evidently, a lot of them start to lose the muscles that would cause goosebumps to raise the fur, which I assume also helps smooth the skin, and maybe it's just a result of losing fur. But
Huh.
yeah, they don't
That's
have
cool.
those specialized muscles. You can see the opposite in that skin roughening and bumpening can have similar effects, but in opposite ways. Instead of allowing the water to slide off of, it hugs the water to the body. So shark scales are the famous example of this, like a golf ball helping the water to better, more efficiently flow across it. You see similar bumpy skin on crocs. There's also patterning. A lot of animals have ridges that help to create very specific hydrofoils. The ridged back of a sea turtle, of the leatherback sea turtle,
Hmm.
specifically, the bumps along the edge of a humpback whale's fin. These help break the water up in a way that creates turbulence, but therefore makes it so that drag can't be consistent. It's not a single pull because you're breaking up the pattern of the water.
Yeah, it's helpful turbulence.
Yes.
It reminds me. I don't know very much about aerodynamics, but I know that the shape of airplane wings
Hmm.
is specific so that it doesn't cause certain types of additional drag.
Yes, exactly. And then one of the easiest ones, which I love this, swimming under the water, because surface drag is much worse. And when you're near the surface, there's a particular kind of drag that kicks in. And if you go down, you eliminate that drag altogether. So there's
Huh.
an evolutionary benefit to being able to submerge while swimming because you avoid the drag at the surface.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. I imagine that there's lots of benefits for being able to get away from the surface because then you're out of the sunlight, you're away from aerial parasites and predators. I
Hmm.
never considered that drag. I would have guessed if it was a water thing, I would have guessed you get away from the waves, that
Yeah.
you're not being like splashed and turned over by wave action. But that's really interesting to know.
Yeah, so it is a more efficient way to be. Speaking of getting under the water, buoyancy is one of the other big concerns, especially for tetrapods going into the water because we no longer have a gas bladder.
Yes, a very important organ in a fish.
Fish have a buoyancy control organ that is a balloon inside the body that they can adjust the amount of air inside by pulling oxygen from their blood. And it acts as a way for them to precisely control where they float in the water. Because higher your buoyancy, the more you want to pop up to the surface. Lower your buoyancy, the more you want to sink down. And if you match the buoyancy at whatever depth you're at, you have neutral buoyancy and you'll just hang there. Tetrapods can achieve buoyancy control through a couple different ways. The two main ones is hydrodynamic and hydrostatic control. Hydrodynamic being the way they swim and the
Hmm.
mechanical forces that they can exert. Hydrostatic being biological and ways to adjust their status so that they can just control their buoyancy. Hydrodynamic controls are going to be things like having fins and flippers and body shape that create reverse lift or lift in the direction that you're wanting to keep you off the bottom or down from the surface.
Right. Once again, to make an airplane comparison, this is how airplanes fly. Is the
Exactly.
shape of the wing forces air around it in a way that creates lift for the wing. That the air basically picks up the airplane into the
Yes.
sky.
You create particular pressures that help you go up. Hydrostatic mechanisms are going to be things like adjusting lungs capacity. Like having your lungs full will increase your buoyancy. A lot of aquatic animals can collapse their lungs down a bit and reduce their buoyancy. Also, having like aerated bones can increase buoyancy, like more
Mm.
space inside the bones, or lots of blubber, which is lighter because it is fatty. And then for weighing yourself down, many animals use gastroliths, stomach stones that they swallow to add some weight.
Yeah, a lot of aquatic animals also have denser bones,
Yes.
which can help have the opposite effect of making you sink better.
Yep. There's two versions of that that you tend to see: thickened bones, which is pachyostoic, or denser bones, which is osteoscleric. And these we tend to see in shallow water aquatic animals like manatees that want to stay near the bottom. Because if you're out in open water, that's very dangerous because now you're going to have to be using energy to stay up.
Right.
In shallow water, you just have to pop up, 5 to 10 feet and you're at the surface. So you don't tend to see that in open ocean animals. You tend to see less dense bone, more spongy bones, much lighter skeletons, because they don't want to sink. And then one of the other big issues, if you are out in the ocean, is going to be osmoregulation, controlling your water and salt intake.
Yeah, this is one of those unsung complications. It's one that's really easy to overlook. That
Yes.
our bodies are constantly exchanging materials with our surroundings,
Mm-hmm.
and if your surroundings are the water, especially ocean water,
Yep.
that's a very you can't drink ocean water.
Yeah.
And so you like I think it's easy to forget because we as humans simply can't survive in the ocean for long periods of time for a bunch of other reasons.
Yes.
It's like when you talk about what what is the danger of being exposed in outer space? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, there's a lot of problems. Like you can't breathe in outer space
Mm-hmm.
because there's not air out there to breathe, but that's not actually you're not going to notice that. The
Yes.
other stuff's going to get you way before that catches up to you. And I think this is one of yes, a lot of stuff's going to be bad for you if you tried to just be out in the ocean. Eventually, it would be that your body starts to become desiccated and just imbalanced because you're not getting the stuff from outside that you need.
Yeah, you need a way to get rid of the excess salt ions that you're going to be getting. And the way especially mammalian bodies do that is by flushing it with water and, peeing out that excess stuff or getting rid of it, through other means. But if you do not have access to fresh water when you're out in salt water, you have to find new ways to handle that need of water or that excess salt. Seals and whales, drinking is not a common thing you see with them, so they are not drinking any water. They maintain their water balance through metabolic and dietary water, which means getting water from the food that they eat and metabolizing things and getting fresh water from the metabolism process.
Cool.
Yeah.
Their body functions like the Iron Man suit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could drink that water.
And it's processing stuff and producing water that they just then use like we would use the water we drink.
That's so cool.
In seabirds and reptiles, you more often see salt glands.
Hmm.
They cut out the complication, get rid of the extra salt.
Yep.
And they'll be in different parts on different animals. Crocodilians, it's in the tongue. Birds, it's typically around the nose. It's a gland on the beak. Sea turtles have ones that are in the orbital cavity, so around the eye. And this is partially because reptilian kidneys can't make urine salty enough. That's saltier than the ocean, so they can't just do it via filtering. They have to actually reduce their salt levels.
Interesting.
And then you do get some, like marine snakes, that find ways to drink fresh water.
Yeah. The I think it's the major like yellow-bellied sea snakes, the
Mhm.
ones that are out there most often, that will drink freshwater puddles from the surface of the ocean.
Yes, that when rain happens, the fresh water sits on top of the salt water for a little bit before it eventually mixes, and they go and drink that. They also have a high tolerance for hypernatremia, which is high concentrations of sodium in the body. So they can tolerate higher amounts of sodium in between rains and stuff.
I love how much of this discussion is effortlessly highlighting the diversity of secondarily aquatic tetrapods.
Right? They're finding different answers to the problems, and it's very cool.
So when we think about, so let's talk about swimming, right?
Yeah.
Because secondarily aquatic tetrapods, ideally, you would just be turned back into a fish.
Yes.
But we've talked about this, for example, with dinosaurs, how the front limbs of quadrupedal dinosaurs are hands pretending to be feet.
Yes.
Because they evolved into hands ancestrally, and now you have to turn them back into feet. And because they went through that intermediate, they don't quite feet the same way that is the back
They're
feet.
weird feet.
They're weird feet. So, what is swimming like in these tetrapods?
So there are typically two major camps of swimming style. Axial swimmers, which are using their body, movements of the spine to produce their propulsion. So dolphins and things like that, moving the tail up and down. Or appendicular swimmers, which is appendages, using the arms or legs or combination of arms and legs to produce your propulsion and move you through the water. Of course, it is not an either or, though most groups do tend to lean more heavily on one than the other. There is a spectrum between of usage of them. Basically, no group only uses one mode, except for sea snakes, which do not have appendages to appendicularly swim, so it is all axial swimming for them.
Sea snakes were like, listen, we got that problem out of the way, making the decisions easier.
What's one of the options? Awesome. That's great to hear.
Ooh, flippers, you say? Gonna have a little. Is there a plan B?
Did you say there was another option? Let's hear that other option.
Funnily enough, flippers is plan B because most fish were swimming with their spines.
Exactly. Undulatory swimming is a very typical form of axial swimming where you move your whole body in a squiggle and it moves waves down the body and produces propulsion. The ultimate version of this is the eel and sea snake. Like your whole body is just wiggled and creates this flow down the body.
It's just a ribbon.
Yes, exactly.
It kind of the way that you can create a very simple parachute just with a ribbon.
Yeah.
Like if you put a ribbon on something relatively light, just the fluttering of that ribbon creates enough drag in the air to slow that thing's descent. Undulatory swimming is basically that in reverse.
Yes.
You're making those ribbon-like fluttering movements to push yourself through the water.
And then that's one end of the extreme of axial swimming. The other end is what we call thuniform swimming, which is tuna-like.
Yes.
Where your body is now actually quite rigid and it's all tail movement. The body is not wiggling, but the tail has become this very specialized motor for fast, powerful strokes to push you through the water. Tunas are the ones this is compared to because they are the go-to example of this shape of fish. This is what you get more when you start looking at dolphins and other whales. Most other members are going to be between these two. So like manatees are subungulatory. They are swimming, but they're not eel-like, but they're using more of their body. They don't have that rigid tuna-like body.
Right. Among extinct examples, ichthyosaurs are interpreted as being very tuna-like. That
Yes.
they were moving, they were swimming with the tail, whereas mosasaurs might have been more like whales, where it is tail-driven, but a lot of your body is tail, and there might have still been some mobility in that upper part of the body.
Well, and they also made the point that with ichthyosaurs, when you look at earlier and more basal members, they were more flexible bodied. So they would have been more ungulatory swimmers, and then later ones become more tuna shaped and would have been more thuniform swimmers. And so you can get this very nice spectrum between the two. Limb swimmers, appendicular swimmers, you tend to see a couple of different common modes that are grouped in the means in which that motion creates propulsion. Paddling, which is doggy paddling and things like that, of I'm basically just walking in the water, I'm just pushing off. That is what's called drag based. It's you're pushing against the water. Then you have rowing, which is a little more specialized, where the limbs are more typically off to the side and a little more like a turtle typically does. And that can then lead to underwater flyers, where you're now actually creating lift with the motion, not just pushing the water, but flying through it. Sea turtles, penguins, these are classic examples of underwater flyers.
Yeah, limb-based swimming is an interesting one because we tend not to see it in fish.
Yes.
This is something that secondarily aquatic tetrapods have really had to innovate here. There are examples, right? Stingrays are an excellent example of a limb-based swimming fish.
And you do get ones that use the pectoral fins as their main, like, because they're reef fish, so they're not zooming around, they're puttering, and they'll use other fins, like the dorsal fin will have the ability to wiggle or things like that. So you get some of these, but they're usually, it's like when you see in space movies where they use the adjustment thrusters to move around in space instead of the main booster. It's like that. While for these tetrapods, Sea lions are undersea flyers. They're using their arms and they are moving with these arms.
Yeah. Sea lions are also using their legs
Yes.
like a tail, which is another. Again, we have this variety where sea turtles are using all four flippers in varying ways. I believe that they're mostly propelled, they're
Yeah.
mostly front wheel drive.
Exactly. The front arms are the propulsion, the back are maneuvering and like steering.
Yes. There has been research that's looked at plesiosaurs,
Mhm.
extinct,
Mhm.
one of the marine reptile groups, that suspects they might have actually been swimming with all four. They might have been all wheel drive
Yeah.
flipper swimmers. But then you've got penguins, which are front swimmers. A lot of semi aquatic seabirds, like ducks and such, are actually foot propelled.
Yes,
They
exactly.
kick themselves along.
And your seals, as compared to sea lions, are back foot. They are kicking with the
Mm.
back feet, and the front arms are used for steering. So you see all sorts of combinations, and it's good to know you can switch between them. Otters paddle at the surface, but then ungulatory swim underwater.
Oh.
So
So switch. I see. I thought you were going to say you can switch between like which limbs you're using, but you're saying you can switch between limb swimming and spine swimming.
yes. So like the
Cool.
exact mode of swimming is not a set, this is how this video game character moves. It is a situation to situation. Dolphins have front flippers that are mostly just for steering, but they still can use those for other tasks and to help them do slight maneuvers.
Yeah.
One of the notes on the limbs when they're used for these different swimmings, you tend to see very common structures that they become paddle shaped, webbed hands for bigger surfaces. They tend to become hydrofoils, which means shaped kind of like an airplane wing to better produce lift or to move through the water. And the main difference is how they're used, where they are used for steering if you're an axial swimmer, propulsion if you're a limb swimmer, but the shapes often end up being quite similar either way.
Hmm.
And then in addition to this is for stability, you need to keep yourself oriented right in the water because there's no ground for you to push off of. So you need to be able to keep yourself in pointed in the direction you want to be pointed. The limbs come into this for maneuvering and stabilizing. Many animals develop dorsal fins.
Hmm.
Dolphins are our go-to example today for that, but there are fossil examples where they have a dorsal-like fin. The body shape can also help to just orient when you're moving to keep you steady, but that's one thing that also has to come up is that now when I push, I also want to make sure I'm going straight or in the direction I want to be going and that I'm staying upright the way I want to be upright.
Yeah, you're not just doing a barrel roll
Yeah, I'm not just
by
tumbling through the
accident.
water as I'm flapping. I am moving purposefully in the direction I want to be going.
Yeah. So there is another consideration that I feel has been conspicuously absent so far in our discussion of dealing with moving back into the water, and that is breathing. Fish tend to have gills and they can extract oxygen from the water. Tetrapods very distinctly lost that ability, especially by the time you get to amniotes. So, how do tetrapods in the water deal with the very notable lack of breathable air?
The most common is that they're going to do things like increasing lung capacity and becoming more efficient in the way they use the oxygen they take in. There's a bunch of different ways this is done, but some examples are like whales and pinnipeds, which are your seals and sea lions, have the ability to take deep breath, deep efficient breaths. When they surface, they can empty their lungs and then fill them very efficiently so that they are not dealing with old air. They also have the ability to like empty their lungs to do dives so that they can
Hmm.
go down, but also while doing that, there's a bunch of features going on so that they can maintain their oxygen supply while down there. Their circulatory system is large and very intricate, so they can hold more oxygenated blood in the body in this very dense circulatory system. Their blood also has a high amount of hemoglobin, which is what holds on to oxygen. So their blood is more efficient at holding oxygen. And when they do move the air out of the lungs, it'll shift into the trachea and the bronchioles of the lungs to help dissipate the air more efficiently instead of just getting rid of it all.
Interesting. Yeah, it's all these adaptations for being able to make the most out of a breath. And
Yes.
you get those incredible stats of, this whale can stay underwater for 30 minutes or 2 hours or whatever the number is, that they're exceptionally good at holding on to that air.
And then they are also very efficient while using that air physically. My favorite example are elephant seals do very deep dives to hunt going after squid and stuff. And when they do that, they're not swimming. They just control their buoyancy and sink.
Yeah, Nora and I have had a great memorable moment. I think it was earlier this year. We got off of a ferry, and there were a couple of harbor seals uh, living up to their name in the harbor. And
Yes.
there was one that was. It looked to me like a big male, and at first we didn't notice it because it looked like just a rock on the bottom. And it slowly came up, stuck its nose out, and took a breath and then just fell back down. Didn't
Yes.
move the flippers at all. Just fell, hit a rock, rolled off of it, and fell back into the crevice that it had come out of. Did not do any swimming, just floated up and then sank back down.
And it's very much that mentality of when I mean, it's like if you are dealing with a shoddy power grid and it's like, listen, if we go above this many amps or this much power usage, we will shut down things, so you
Mm-hmm.
can only turn on 3 things at a time. It's like that. If you're going to be doing long dives on lungs without gills, you can't be running around down there and wasting the oxygen. You need to conserve
Yeah.
it, so they become very efficient with their movements.
This is the classic Lost in Space scenario
Yes,
of the ship only has so much oxygen left, so we have to restrict the activities that we're doing.
exactly. The other thing that will happen with many animals is reptiles especially are good at this, is starting to take in some oxygen through the skin. Amphibians do
Yeah.
this, reptiles can do this. They don't have gills, but they have the ability to subcutaneously breathe through the skin. And we have famous examples. These aren't marine, but like lungless salamanders are salamanders that breathe purely through this means.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way to not often be able to like actively hunt off of the oxygen you're getting from this, but to supplement how much oxygen you have in your lungs and what oxygen you're using. It's like
Yes.
having a solar panel on the top of your car to just help the battery, that kind of
Yes.
idea.
And the main example that comes to my mind when talking about this for aquatic tetrapods is turtles.
Yes.
That pond turtles breathe through their butts.
Breathe through their cloacas, and that's why they can hibernate in a lake throughout all winter.
Yes. And that is a really good point to emphasize the point that you were just making. Pond turtles aren't doing this when they're being active,
Mm-mm.
but it does get them enough oxygen to survive while hibernating.
Yes. So there are different means and different ways, but you have to make the most of each breath. Unless you're being a
Yeah.
surface swimmer, and then you just have to have enough breath to go down and hunt. If you're only diving down 15 feet, then you just tend to have bigger breaths and can handle, like I know a lot of animals have the ability to handle higher degrees of CO2 and before it becomes toxic to them, so
Right,
they
right,
can
right.
just sit on a stale breath for longer than we could before it starts to be bad.
And you do see some of those physical adaptations, like crocs are a famous example where the nostrils are raised up so that they
Yes.
can just poke the nostrils. And if you watch, and sea snakes do this, seals do this, they just poke the nose up above the water. And a
Yes.
lot of these animals have nostrils that are raised or separated a little bit that helps you do it quickly and efficiently. I think we talked about this in the toothed whales episode 172 about the way that whales exhale through the blowhole,
Mm-hmm.
which is releasing a breath like a sneeze and then rapidly filling the lungs back up. So it's just all the air out and all the air back in an incredible movement, incredible suction and propulsion, and then you go right back down.
Yes, and putting your nose also as a blowhole on the top of your head makes it just so much more convenient. They don't have to pause to stick the face out. They just have to
Hmm.
poke their as they come up, poke the back out, and by the time they're headed back down, they've finished that breath. Moving the nostrils up and usually backward on the snout is very common among a lot of marine groups. Not all of them, obviously. Like seals still have it on the end of their snout, like other mammals
Hmm.
do, and crocs still have it on the end of their snout, but we see very commonly in marine groups upward nostrils and moving toward the eyes.
Yeah. Now, another perhaps easy to overlook issue, we did a whole episode, episode 179, about the importance of managing temperature of the body. And thermoregulation is vastly different if you're spending all your time in the water. So, what are secondarily aquatic vertebrates doing about body temperature?
Yes, so when you're in the water, the big issue is that water takes heat away better than air does.
Hmm.
It is much more efficient at sapping heat from a source. So you're going to lose your body heat quicker and in larger amounts in the water than you do in air. Insulation is very often the main response of going to need to, like wearing a coat out in winter, insulate your body. Mammals typically use fur for insulation, which works well, but then eventually becomes a hindrance if you're going to be marine because now it creates a lot of drag.
Right. Like otters are still using their fur. They have this
Mhm.
very thick, dense fur. But then you look at more marine adapted animals like whales and seals and sea lions, and they have moved over to blubber.
Yes, exactly. And that's typically the mammal solution is when fur is not the route we are going, we're going to have blubber. Blubber is also useful because it can help with streamlining the body because it
Oh,
smooths
yeah.
surfaces because it just kind of makes you like a balloon. If you do go furred, you typically get, like you said, very dense, complex, double layered fur where you have an inner layer, an outer layer. The inner layer stays dry and captures a pocket of air.
Yeah. Again, like a coat.
This is another way that you can control buoyancy is by that air trapped and stuff. So it's another
Sure.
solution that has two things going for it.
There's a are they spiders that do this? That capture a bubble of air
Yep.
that they can dive. They just hold the air with them as they dive down like a scuba tank.
Yeah, water spiders will capture on the back and they create like a little diving bell web under the water that they then collect that air in. I know that there are also beetles and flies that also trap air against
Hmm.
their body and just have a little scuba suit of a bubble that clings to them. The other thing that many animals will do to maintain heat in the ocean is pick up their metabolism. Seals and whales, it has been noted, have higher metabolisms than land mammals.
Hmm.
I saw one paper noting that estimates based off of their metabolic rates have them at a rate of 1.5 to 3 times that of the typical land mammal metabolism.
Interesting. So you're just able to generate more body heat.
Yes, their idle body temperature for some of them is around 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. So they are typically just running much hotter than the average land animal just to help them stay warm in the water. This does mean if you're like a seal, when you come on land, you could overheat very easily. So you'll see things like panting or digging down into like the sand to try to maintain their temperature when they are out of the water. You'll also see things like redirecting blood flow away from limbs to keep warm blood in the body and cold blood out where it's going to lose its heat very easily.
Yeah, I think we talked in the thermoregulation episode about a lot of animals use cross current exchange,
Yep,
where
yep.
your warm blood passes right by the cold blood so that you can mix the temperature so that you don't have a lot of cold veins.
Well, and it does a great thing where as cold blood comes back from the flipper, you run warm blood by it going to the flipper. It warms up the cold blood as it's coming back to your heart, and it takes the heat away from the warm blood so it can't be lost to the ocean. So
Oh, yeah.
it just passes the heat off before it makes it to the flipper. So you're
Yeah,
maintaining most of your heat in the body and not sending it out.
the blood is making the full circuit to the end of the flipper, but the heat is only going about halfway and then coming
Yes,
back.
exactly. And then one of the other most common things you'll see is gigantothermy that Being a big animal helps you maintain your heat longer because it takes longer for a big thing to cool or warm than it does a small thing because of you have more mass inside you if you're big than you do compared to your surface area when you're small. So just being big helps you maintain heat and lose heat slower. Whales got big, a lot of seals got big, sea turtles. This is how the leatherback sea turtle famously maintains its heat since it is not producing its heat via metabolism. So just getting big is a very common feature among ocean animals. And a big part of it follows along with Bergman's rule, which shows that you'll get bigger animals at colder environments. Ocean counting as one of these colder environments, we tend to see larger members of lineages once they move into the ocean.
Yeah, we talked about that in episode 144 about gigantism and dwarfism.
Yeah.
So what else? What else has to change for aquatic tetrapods to be aquatic?
One of a big list of them I found was for like senses, that
Oh,
sensing
sure.
things in the air is very different than sensing things in the water. Of course, some things are gonna be different, like feeding. You're gonna see things like suction and filter feeding come up that aren't options on land. Because if I try to suction feed, I'm just inhaling aggressively.
Yep.
But eyes tend to get adaptations. We talked about in the pinnipeds episode that they have eyes very specialized to be good in and out of water. So they have these
Hmm.
flattened, unusual eyes. Ichthyosaurs had ginormous eyes, some of the biggest eyes we see in vertebrates. And this is going to be helpful when you're diving down deep. So if you're a deep diving animal, you're going to tend to get bigger eyes. Hearing has to get adaptations. We talked about this in the whale episode a whole bunch, that they get vibrations through their lower jaw, but they also have a lot of adaptations to the ear structure to be able
Yeah,
to pick up undersea vibrations.
this was one of the ways that early whales were identified in the fossil record, is that their ears are
Exactly.
unusual.
Because hearing, well, it's, stick your head underwater during a pool and see how weird the sounds sound. And
Hmm.
it's because our ears are not good at picking up vibrations in that medium. They're good at picking up in air. So you need to adjust the way your ear works. You'll also see adaptations, for making out the environment. If you go down deep enough, you can't see. And then you're going to get things like echolocation in toothed whales showing up, but
Hmm.
also vibrissae, whiskers,
Oh,
become a
yeah.
very common structure in many aquatic mammals because now they can feel around their environment. Walrus whiskers are a famous example, but evidently I did not know this. So sea cows, manatees, and dugongs also have whiskers on the face, which I did know, but they also have whiskers down the body, which might kind of act like a fish lateral line to just feel the movement of water around them.
Wow. I was going to say fish have a lateral line system,
Mm-hmm.
which is a series of basically pressure detectors all down the body that allows them to feel. Basically, it gives them like low level telepathy where you can
Yes.
just feel the movement in the environment around you. And I was just going to say whiskers are helpful because we don't have that. Well, that's something that got lost as tetrapods moved onto land. I also did not know that manatees have maybe made a hairy lateral line system.
Yeah. And like seals will use their whiskers to track down fish in open water following the turbulent path of the fish.
Cool. They're hunting like a snake.
Yes. Yep.
That's so cool.
It's very I saw a video, there's a video talking about it and showing you could watch the path the fish went and then watch the seal just follow right along the path as it
Wow.
slowly maneuvered after the fish. Smelling is another thing that really becomes useless for most mammals once you're in the water because our nose is even more specialized to smell in the air than our ears are to hear in the air. Like,
Sure.
our nose is only good at picking up chemicals that are airborne, not any other way.
Yeah. Also, in order to smell, we have to inhale,
Mm-hmm.
which is a problem if you're under the
Yes.
water.
There is still evidence of active scent like abilities in some aquatic animals. So like I from what I could glean, it seems like it's not fully clear
Hmm.
how much scent ability like a whale has because it was thought that they basically had just lost that, but it does seem like there's some system there still. So we're not sure.
All right.
Seals definitely still have a pretty good sense of smell and will use it to track down food. because they are spending more time at the surface. So sense of smell is not turned off for sure in mammals, but it is less important for a lot of them. And then with some reptiles, like snakes, you get the forked tongue, which still works perfectly well underwater because it's tactile. So it's picking things up, and that works fine.
Once again, snakes came ready. They were ready for the party. This is all very interesting. I also realized as we were going through this that we were going through examples so quickly that I wasn't finding the opportunity to jump in and list episode numbers. So, for those interested, we did do episodes on, we did whale evolution in 41, and then we did toothed whales specifically in episode 172. We did pinnipeds in episode 104. We did turtles in 60, where we did talk about sea turtles a bit. We did marine crocs and sea snakes in episodes 168 and 169. And we've done some of the extinct groups. Ichthyosaurs was episode 116, Mosasaurs was episode 51, and Plesiosaurs was episode 72. And there's probably other ones that I'm forgetting to mention right now. We did penguins in episode 108. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of episodes we've done about secondarily aquatic tetrapods. Maybe we'll make a full list in the blog post. That could be kind of fun.
That would be great. Yeah. We have a playlist for marine life on the YouTube.
Oh, that's true. We do.
So there's also a bunch of those in there.
I'm trying to remember if ocean is one of our tags on the podcast, on the blogs, so. On the blog. It might be. So yes, we have compiled some of these in convenient places to check it out. So go look at our playlists of aquatic animals. Well, why don't we take a short break, and then after we come back, we can move into the fossil record and discuss some ancient examples of adaptations to secondarily aquatic lifestyles. We'll talk some about the evolution of it, and we'll generally get a bit more paleontology-y. Stay tuned. So, Will, how do we know when we have fossils that we're looking at a secondarily aquatic vertebrate?
Some of them are obvious signals. We find the fossils in marine deposits.
Yeah. That's a real big giveaway.
You were in the ocean at least. when your body was fossilized, you were in an ocean.
Yes. That's not a guarantee because things can go. We found like ankylosaurs in the ocean. So like things can get washed in or, birds fall in, but it certainly helps.
Yes. Well, and there's a bunch of like elephants are known to swim across seawater to get to islands, and animals that are like cast out from rivers can be cast out to sea and be swimming around there for a bit. So like lots of examples of how you could get in the ocean while alive or dead and be fossilized. The second most obvious is you're shaped like a swimmer. You've got paddle-shaped limbs. You've got, a dorsal fin. You've got a tail fin. Those are very strong indicators of you are specialized to swimming, so you are secondarily aquatic. But there are animals that are quite aquatic, but don't have, like otters. We're like, you are still shaped very much like a weasel in most of your skeleton.
Yeah, they don't have like paddle hands.
They still have hands and feet.
Yeah, like if you look at the skeleton of the front limbs of a sea turtle or a whale or an ichthyosaur, those are even just in the bones. Those are very clearly a paddle. That is not a hand anymore.
Exactly. So with animals like that, it can start to become trickier. You can get a lot more of, well, you were found in the ocean and you definitely could be a swimmer, but how were you semi-aquatic? Were you aquatic? And there are some trends that we tend to see. One of the ones that I saw was in especially fully marine animals, but aquatic animals, the humerus, the main front arm bone, the upper arm bone, tends to be longer than the femur, the upper leg bone.
Oh.
Which is very important and notable because in terrestrial animals, the opposite is almost always true. That the back legs are longer than the front legs and the femur is longer than the humerus.
Yeah.
This is likely because of stability. Our back legs in us tetrapods attach to and push on directly to the spinal cord via the hips, while the front arms are not connected directly to our axial skeleton. Our shoulder blades and shoulders are more loosely connected, and it's not that bone to bone the same way. So the back legs are a much better source of stability if you're on land.
Mm-hmm.
In the water, we tend to see a inverse of that, where the front arms become more important. This is probably for a couple of reasons. One, you're not on land anymore, so you don't need the strong back legs to move you around the same way. But even if you are using your back legs for swimming, for instance, there's still a benefit to reducing them because it shifts your center of gravity.
Oh.
Reducing that mass moves your center of gravity forward, and especially in mammals and reptiles, the center of buoyancy, where you tend to float from, tends to be forward because of the lungs.
Yeah.
And if your center of gravity and your center of buoyancy are closer together, it makes you much more stable in the water. So you don't want these big gangly legs hanging off the back of you, pushing your center of gravity back and wanting to make you float upwards like a cork, which is what happens to us humans. It's very hard for us to float underwater sideways.
Yeah.
We want to float up and
Interesting.
down.
Well, and this makes a whole lot of sense with the trend that a lot of secondarily aquatic tetrapods actually reduce or even lose the hind legs.
Exactly.
Where, like, cetaceans, whales, and dolphins have essentially completely lost their hind legs. Even groups like seals and sea lions, where they still have those hind legs and are even using them, they are smaller. They're
Yes.
reduced from what you might expect. And while you were explaining the shifting the center of mass concept, I could see in my head like a little animation of whales reducing and losing the hind legs as their tail gets bigger and bigger
Yes.
to be their main propulsive tool. Because that's another nice thing about reducing the back legs, is if you're using your tail, you are maintaining, you're not overly heavy in the back end, but you're also getting to repurpose all that musculature.
Yes, exactly. So it is a very, very consistent trend that we tend to see. Every modern marine tetrapod follows this trend.
Cool.
It is very constant.
Well, I can think of one group that doesn't follow this trend, actually. Solved that problem a long time ago.
Yep. Yep. My what's longer than my what? A lot of the other features we look for are also features of the limbs that tend to hint toward a more aquatic lifestyle. Loss of forearm twisting, so the ability for us to twist our wrist is because of the movement of the two bones in your forearm, and that kind of gets locked down, and you don't need to twist your wrist the same way. All of that's done at the shoulder to move your flipper like arm.
Right. This also means that the flipper itself is more of a rigid paddle,
Exactly.
because you don't want it to be bending and twisting as you move it, because
Yes.
that weakens its ability to propel or control the body.
Three very similar features that we see that are also in that same reason of adaptation: flattened wrist joints, flattened elbow joints, flattened and packed in carpal finger bones. All of these lend to less flexing, more rigid, better paddle.
Yeah, now I'm once again flashing back to episode 116 and thinking about the cobblestone road of
Yep.
an ichthyosaurus paddle.
Yes.
Like, that's just a brick wall. You just turned
Yes.
your hand into a brick wall.
A lot of little flat tile like bones packed in where there's not a lot of room to move. And you see that with joints, that the meeting of the joints stop being two hinges and start being two flat surfaces that meet up.
Yeah. We mentioned this before, but you also see in those same bones that increase in density. That
Yes.
often this is associated, again, like you said, especially with semi aquatic or shallow water tetrapods, that density and thickening of some of the bones.
And on the flip side, a lessening of density of marine open ocean animals is also another potential sign that if they have similar density bones to whales and they have some of these proportions, that suggests you were spending time in the ocean, because otherwise, why would you have this combination?
Yeah.
There are some that are consistent trends in marine groups, but hard to identify in fossils.
Mm.
Loss of nails is a very common thing.
Oh, interesting.
So, loss of claws and nails. There are members that still have it. Sea lions lost their front nails but retained their back nails.
Hmm.
So they have nails, claws on the back feet, and then some like seals and walruses and manatees still have their nails on the front limbs, but most tend to lose them at the front. And this is likely because if you start to lose fur, then you no longer have a need to groom it, and that's mainly what nails are used for a lot of mammals like this.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because the acquisition of claws was an important thing that happened in the transition to amniotes.
Yes.
And part of that is for traction, right?
Yeah.
For moving yourself around over land, for climbing over rocks or whatever, you have those claws.
So that is a very common adaptation. Hard to identify that in the fossil record.
Yeah, you can definitely, in some animals, even if you don't get the claw itself, you might be able to tell from the shape of the finger bones that there
Mhm.
was a claw there. But if you're missing the end of the fingers, there's really no way to know that.
Well, and they even noted on that, when we look for like claw-shaped final bones, walruses don't have notably shaped finger bones but have nails. And then dugongs do have claw-shaped finger bones but no claws.
Well, so scratch
So
that last part.
it's one of those where it could be this also lines up with all the other evidence we have, but you shouldn't use that as a main point. They also noted that the flattening of some of the joint bones and flattening of elements is also sometimes difficult in fossils because you can get deformation. You know,
Yeah,
is this a flattened bone because you were using it as a paddle or because of millions of years of pressure flattening this bone?
yeah.
And there are examples of people finding, fossil animals. Some early members of the Sauropterygians, which are the lineage that eventually leads us to plesiosaurs, often appear flattened, but then when they found three-dimensionally preserved bones, they were rounded.
Mm, yeah.
So,
Yeah, usually we want multiple of these
exactly.
factors, right? We want flipper shaped hands, and we want maybe a difference in the bone density, and we also want it to have been preserved in marine sediments. And
Yes,
you get sort of the checklist.
absolutely.
Well, some fossil groups, it is extremely apparent, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at the skeleton of an ichthyosaur, and there is nothing else that this animal could have been doing that makes any sense at all. This was an aquatic, fully adapted aquatic animal. Similarly, when you look at T Rex, and you're like, yeah,
Yes.
that was a terrestrial creature. But I also know that there are some very famous confusing examples.
Yeah.
Some fossil animals that have gone back and forth. Sometimes these are at the origin of a group. So, like
Hmm.
early
Hmm.
members of the ichthyosaur lineage, where it's like, oh, okay, we know you were gonna be aquatic, but exactly where did that happen? How far along were you at this or this time? But there are also some groups where we just keep arguing about it.
Yes. And very often it is because there is contradictory evidence, either in the preservation or physical features, or sometimes the order in which we see different featured members. One example of that are tanystrophiids.
Yeah, that's a
These
very
are,
famous example.
yep. These are Triassic archosauromorphs, reptiles that had a fairly typical reptile shaped body, but then a long, thin neck with a small head at the end.
Yeah, they kind of look, they almost like a plesiosaur,
Yes.
where you had kind of a normalish body as we might expect, and then a big long head, a big long neck rather.
And they had some of the most extreme neck to body proportions of any animal that's ever lived. They are ridiculous. Their remains, many of them are found in both marine and freshwater environments, but their bodies seem to kind of lack a lot of aquatic adaptations. Like We don't see a long tail for swimming with like we see in a lot of others. We don't see paddle-shaped limbs. They have just kind of hands and feet. Yet some of them are known only from marine deposits. Like Tanystropheus is only known from marine deposits. We don't have any evidence of them not being in the ocean, yet they don't seem to be shaped to be in the ocean. Their back legs are also slightly longer than their forelimbs with a long femur. So they also don't have the proportions of an aquatic animal that we would expect. And then some members, Dinocephalosaurus, which may or may not be related to the group, but it sometimes is grouped in there, has similar features, but has a longer humerus than femur and has wrist bones that are flattened, but is older than Tanystropheus. So it seems to be more aquatic than later members that we see that are only found in marine deposits. So how aquatic these animals were is unclear. There are definitely ways they could be swimming around. Long legs could mean that they were swimming with those back legs, more like ducks and things where they are paddling with the back legs and powering themselves through the water that way. That's the most often suggested way that they were swimming. But yeah, it just, they don't seem to be shaped to live in the ocean, but yet they seemed like they were for sure living in the ocean.
This is giving me the vibes of goats climbing trees.
Yes.
Where it's, were you just one of those examples of an animal that had adapted to do a lifestyle that you were just physically not really specialized for?
Mm-hmm. Well, is this like, orcas are known to have eaten moose because moose dive underwater to get vegetation at the bottom of coastal water and get eaten by orcas. Was that what you were doing?
There were no orcas in the Triassic, so they were safe.
Exactly. Another group that has been argued about, this one has gone fully from being argued, yes, aquatic, no, not aquatic. Desmostylians were a group of mammals, very hippo-like in their proportions, from the Oligocene of the northern Pacific. So they are northern hemisphere, typically have been historically and are now, I think, mostly considered aquatic herbivorous animals like a hippo, but maybe feeding more like a manatee, actually feeding in the water instead of coming out to graze. They are also evidently, if that's true, the only known extinct order of marine mammals that doesn't have any remaining members today.
Yeah, all the other ones have stuck around.
Yep. Where they're grouped has been debated a lot. They've been grouped with Sirenians, the manatees, but this has been challenged, so who they're related to is a bit unclear. They have a lot of features that suggest they are aquatic and marine specifically. Their fossils have been found in marine sediment. Their nose and eyes are moved up more toward the top of the skull. Isotope studies from their tooth enamel suggests an aquatic diet. They have spongy bones, similar to whales, suggesting that they were not just marine but active swimmers. But when you look at them, their legs look like land animal legs.
Huh.
They don't really seem, they're not paddly. Like they're compared to hippos because they just got legs. And there have been studies in the past that have indicated, based off the structure and anatomy and biomechanics that they interpreted, that they were more terrestrial than aquatic and probably paddling around more like a polar bear does when they were in the water, but not active open ocean swimmers. But then more recent analysis of the bone structure suggests no, they seem like they are fully aquatic, and that in fact their limbs may have been incapable of supporting their weight on land.
Huh.
And whether they were like active swimmers or bottom walkers is also debated. Were they paddling around or were they walking along the bottom more like hippos and not actually swimming much? So they seem like they were living in the ocean, but once again, they don't seem to be shaped like well for that, but their bones seem like they might not be good on land either.
Weird. They came from space.
They came from space. They were dropped down there.
Well, I think that I think both of the examples that you've mentioned here so far are really interesting demonstration because the whole first half, we were talking about the incredible diversity of different ways that different groups have adapted for secondarily aquatic lifestyles.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two great examples of what seem to be secondarily aquatic tetrapods that just did it a completely different way than
Yes.
any of the examples we have today.
Yeah, it's sometimes you get really weird, unclear members. There's the famous example of Spinosaurus, which we have
Yep.
talked about, and goes back and forth as to how much in the water they could be. And that's another one where they've got that big flattened tail and denser
Mm-hmm.
bones, and obviously an aquatic diet.
There's evidence of them eating fish.
Mm-hmm.
They've got that long croc-like face.
Yes. But then some evidence has shown that they would not be able to float upright if they tried to float on the water's surface, while others have suggested that they should actually be able to dive even. So that one's still very much up in the air as to how aquatic Spinosaurus was.
Yeah, Spinosaurus is one where it's really like you were on the shore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not clear how far from the shore you got.
Yes. And that's tricky to tell. There is one example I have to mention because it's the marine crocs,
Of course.
which are not debated as to whether they were marine. They were very clearly marine, fully
Mhm.
adapted. The Metriorhynchids are the crocs that have flipper-like limbs, scaleless bodies, have a fluked tail, fully marine, incredibly adapted to the ocean, but their proportions are wrong in their legs,
Oh.
which I'd always noticed, but I didn't know that it was a trend until doing this notes. Their back legs are way longer than their front legs,
Mm-hmm.
which, as we already discussed, is not the way it's supposed to go. You're supposed to have longer arms than legs,
Yep.
but their proportions are ridiculous. They have these short front limbs, and then their back limbs are still have a bendable knee and are long. Their femur is more than 3 times as long as their humerus, which is a proportion seen in only a few other terrestrial tetrapods, things like tyrannosaurids and alvarezzosaurids.
Dinosaurs, who are famous for having very short arms.
They have the proportion of a T-Rex, but yet they're in the ocean where you're supposed to have long front arms.
Incredible.
This could be due to their reproduction. Because, and this is something that we also note in a lot of modern marine animals, that many secondarily aquatic animals give live birth because you can't lay an amniotic egg in the ocean. That's why sea turtles have to come back onto shore.
Mm-hmm.
That has often been suspected and proposed for Metriorhynchids based off of their lifestyle and some of like the shapes of the hip bones, but we do not have direct evidence of it. Like, we do not have a baby shown that is definitely a live birth young in one of them. And there is reason to suspect that it didn't happen because A, we don't have any examples of live birth in archosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
No dinosaur, bird, or other croc has ever shown any evidence of doing this. So if they did do it, they could be the only ones who ever did it, which would be potential but weird. There's also no example of live birth evolving after entering the ocean for a secondarily aquatic animal.
Right. It usually is something you had first.
Yes.
And it made it easier to make that transition.
Exactly. We don't have any evidence of a group that developed this feature after becoming marine. So that's another reason that it might not have happened. And if that's the case, they may have been needing to come ashore like sea turtles and digging nests, and they may have needed these back legs for that. That might be why they have such weird proportions.
Yeah. Interesting. Since you bring up crocs and marine crocs and their unusually proportioned legs, it does seem like a good point to mention that Cretaceous marine snakes also had significantly longer hind legs than front legs because they had no front legs.
Yes.
They had completely lost and again, this is something that seems to have happened before they became sea snakes.
Yes.
That they were already like this. And we talked about in the sea snakes episode 169 what I've been thinking about this whole time, because almost all of the discussion that you've been explaining about how we identify ancient marine animals is limbs based.
Yes.
Which raises the question, how do you know if it's something like a snake? And we talked in episode 169 about it's bone density, it's where they're found, it's some of the proportions of the spine and the ribs that show they have a taller, flatter body. They were more eel shaped. So there are clues beyond the limbs. But if you
Yes.
have limbs, it's usually, crocs excluded, a
Hmm.
very handy tool to be able to look at the legs.
Yes, absolutely. And retaining back limbs could have other uses for the snake or for crocs or other members if it helps you in mating to couple together. Legs can be used for that. And so, if that is a necessary feature for that group, then you might end up with proportions that are different because of the way you specifically need to live your life as that animal.
Yeah. So, all of the examples that we've been talking about, of course, all the cool mammal examples are Cenozoic, the last 60 million years or so. There are tons of examples from the Mesozoic, the age of reptiles, and we have cases we've already discussed, like the Tanystrophiids, all the way back to the Triassic period. What are the earliest known examples of secondarily aquatic tetrapods?
Absolutely. So we see evidence of tetrapods moving back to the water fairly early on. Like really early in their evolution, we see examples of aquatic or at least semi aquatic members. Spinoaquialis is a carboniferous reptile, looks very much like a lizard, about 30 centimeters long, a foot long, and seems to be our first semi-aquatic reptile. Has laterally flattened tail with a very fan-like structure to it. It's found alongside marine fish in the deposits it's found in, and it evolved very shortly after the first confirmed reptiles.
Yeah, Carboniferous is when reptiles show up.
Yep. Like it's slightly younger than the oldest specimens of reptile we have.
Yeah, so the Carboniferous, the early Carboniferous, is when we see the first fully terrestrial tetrapod communities.
Yes.
So this is only a couple 10 million years after tetrapods made the full switch
Yep.
from water to land, and already we see some starting to make the shift back.
Yes. So semi-aquaticness happened basically right away, and we started moving back in the water. It doesn't seem like most things suggest that this is a fully aquatic animal, that this is definitely living more like, a water monitor where swimming, but also has very functional legs for moving around on land still.
Sure.
The oft cited and famous example of the first aquatic, secondarily aquatic tetrapods are the mesosaurs.
Yeah.
These are small reptiles from the early Permian. They may be basal sauropsids or basal parareptiles. Where they are exactly is not clear,
Right.
but
They're either early true reptiles or they're close to reptiles. They're
yes.
somewhere at the base of the reptile tree.
They are often cited as the first fully aquatic amniotes. There's a bunch of evidence in their body that suggests this. They have long, laterally compressed tails, so like a paddle. They have webbed limbs and long digits, so paddle like feet. Their back foot is much larger than their hand, so seems to be a good source of propulsion. Their nose is close to the eyes and more toward the top of the skull. They have poorly ossified structures in their limb bones, so less rigid and less structural, at least in the juveniles and early adults we have, which suggests they are more aquatic and not needing to support their weight on land. There is evidence that they might have live birth of some sort because there is some specimens associated with embryos or in utero specimens that could mean they were about to give birth without an egg, but yet there also are some isolated eggs found that might be associated to them. So
All right.
that's not as clear. It's thought that they were likely coastal, not open ocean, so shallow coastal waters. They have thickening and denser bones in the ribs and humerus that suggest that shallow water lifestyle. But the well preserved specimens we have tend to be mostly juveniles and young adults, which seem pretty unarguably to have been in aquatic habitats.
Okay.
The few adult specimens we have are not as well preserved, but some of the evidence in them, specifically looking at the vertebral column, the backbone and tail proportions, seem for the adults to fit better with a semi aquatic morphology and
Okay.
not a fully aquatic one, which could mean that they shifted. that the young were fully aquatic and the adults were semi-aquatic.
Yeah, which is something that would be a little bit odd
Hmm.
compared to modern reptiles, because we don't
Yes,
really see that in reptiles, but is extremely unsurprising compared to modern amphibians.
exactly. Yep. This also could be supported potentially by the fact that we don't find nice adult skeletons commonly because they were not living in the aquatic habitat where they would fossilize well.
Yeah.
But some other studies have suggested that foraging on land would be difficult for them because of other features of the skeleton. That though the spine seems to suggest semi aquatic, other features do not support that as much. Some features that they don't have, that most aquatic animals have, they don't have reduced limbs. So their limbs are still pretty substantial compared to the body. They don't have, the extra finger bones that we see in more paddle limbed animals. And if this was indeed supposed to be marine animals, we would expect to see some of those.
Yeah.
And then the last first I want to mention, mostly just because we've been sticking with reptiles, is the first aquatic mammal that we have an example of,
Oh, yeah.
which is Castorocata. This is Middle Jurassic, platypus-sized animal. It's a docodont mammaliform, and it has anatomy that suggests a semi-aquatic lifestyle. Webbed feet, broad, flattened tail like a beaver, and it is our first secondarily aquatic mammaliform that we know of in the fossil record.
Yeah. Castorocata's name means beaver tail.
Yep.
Castorocata. And the species is Lutrosimilis, which means otter like. That this was a small, like, yeah, platypus sized, which, funnily enough, also a
Yes.
secondarily aquatic mammal.
Yep.
It's really, and Middle Jurassic means, once again, this is pretty shortly after mammaliforms get started around 200 million years ago.
Yes.
So we're seeing this repeated trend that it only takes 10 or 20 million years before you start seeing these recognizable aquatic adapted species in each of these groups.
Yeah. It there's a lot of benefits to going back to the water.
Well, and it's not remotely surprising because there's a lot of water out there.
Yep.
And there's a lot of food in the water and there's a lot of safety in the water. So it doesn't, in much the same way that we've talked about before, that basically all vertebrates can swim because, yeah, you have to be able to swim. You live on Earth. Someday you're going to end up in the water. That's just a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, it would be a very poor for you if you if you don't have a solution for when that happens.
Yes, be prepared. So looking at the big picture, and we've already sort of touched on this quite a bit, but just to zoom us out, do we have an idea of how many times secondarily aquatic lifestyles have evolved? What groups, it probably would be easier to ask, what groups haven't done it?
Right. I didn't find like a overall list, but I did find some that list it for different groups among reptiles and mammals. Because once again, when we're talking about secondarily aquatic tetrapods, we're meaning amniotes, which are reptiles and mammals. Among reptiles, in both cases, numerous independent invasions of the water have happened across a bunch of different groups, and they noted that this makes the land to water transition unique compared to most other transitions like that, because land to air has only happened the 3 times in vertebrates, and water to land has only happened the 1 time, yet this one has happened dozens of times.
Yeah, it calls to us.
It is a very consistent thing that we yearn to do.
See the line where the sky meets the sea.
Among reptiles, I saw it noted that at least 12 marine evasions have happened, mostly during the Mesozoic. That was the heyday for reptiles and the heyday for marine reptiles. And then among mammals, that at least 7 independent invasions have happened, once again, mostly during the Cenozoic, after the age of reptiles in the age of mammals. This includes all the members we've mentioned up till now, as well as a few we haven't mentioned. The placodonts are a group of marine reptiles that were quite successful during the Mesozoic. These were part of Sauropterygia, so makes them related to plesiosaurs, but they are not like the group that led to or closely related to, but overall, they show up during the Triassic and are very different than most members we've mentioned. They had flattened teeth for eating hard shelled prey, and they had these robust little stiff bodies, much more like a turtle. And some of them even got armored bodies. And in fact, different members got armor in different ways. And so they were these little marine armored reptiles, some very much resembling sea turtles, others resembling horseshoe crabs in the way their armor was patterned. And they have very dense bones, and the heavy armor plating also probably helped them feed along the bottom in shallow waters.
Yeah, the Triassic period had a radiation of marine reptile lineages because you had the
Mhm.
placodonts, you had nothosaurs, you had pachypleurosaurs. There was just this experimentation, and ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs were the two groups that emerged successful out of that. That
Yes.
there was this whole smorgasbord of marine reptiles for a little while, and then the Triassic came to an end, and only so many of them pushed through. And then Mosasaurs happened way later,
Mhm.
and came on the and were so cool that the Mesozoic ended.
They went, "All right, that's enough."
That we did it. That we did like the Cretaceous happened, and Mosasaurs evolved in the seas, and snakes radiated, and true crocodilians evolved,
Mhm.
and the Earth went, well, we reached peak reptile. Let's try
Yep.
something new. It's not going
Yep,
to get
we're
any
not
better
gonna
than
get better
this.
than exactly. And that's one thing to note, that we see these invasions across reptilia. Like archosaurs did it with the marine crocs. We have lizards and snakes doing it with mosasaurs and marine snakes. We have other groups of reptiles, the ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs,
Turtles.
turtles doing it. So basically every major group. I did see some listings of like semi-aquatic rhynchocephalians. I didn't see like them mentioned in
Yeah.
detail, but like basically every major group has gone to back to the water to some degree, and many of them made it to the ocean.
Yeah. Really, the only standout exception is dinosaurs.
Yep.
Uh, and even then, there are loads of aquatic birds.
Yes, exactly. And though I often in many of these lists, they'd be like, we're talking about non-bird reptiles and mammals. Birds will be their own discussion because they are
Yes.
so notably different. But yeah, many birds have returned to the water and have become aquatic and marine, if not fully aquatic, very aquatic.
Yeah.
Mammals have also done it across many lineages. We've mentioned the big famous ones that we have today, but there are also some examples like the marine sloths, the Thalassocnus sloths from South America, alongside your giant ground sloths that, according to the way they're fossilized and evidence like them having denser bones and some of their proportions, that they were swimming sloths feeding on plant material during the Miocene.
Yeah. Like manatee sloths.
Yes, and we're probably swimming very much like sloths swim today, with long limbs paddling in the water. And when we look at the diversity of mammals, pinnipeds are carnivorans, whales come from ungulates, hoofed animals. So
hmm
we even see a large variety that have gone marine. And then semi-aquatic, there's rodents. Mustelids have given us otters.
Yep. Platypuses over in monotremes.
Hmm.
There's probably semi aquatic marsupials.
There are, but I'm blanking on them right now. I know that there are swimming marsupials, but I can't think of the example.
Huh.
I forgot to look those up specifically.
Huh. Listeners, let us know which ones we're forgetting about.
Yeah, really the groups that you're lacking are like primates haven't really done it, even though
hmm
we do have like primates that associate with the water but aren't semi-aquatic.
Yeah. And then like bats,
Yeah.
similar to pterosaurs, right? Pterosaurs are another
Hmm.
group where it's like, yeah, there were in very similar ways that we see in many birds, pterosaurs that seem to have hunted in and around the water. There are bats that hunt in the water today. There
Yes.
are fish-eating bats, but there aren't like like open ocean swimmers among bats and pterosaurs.
Exactly. Like if a bat's swimming, something went wrong. That is a
Yes.
bad day for that bat. Even manatees are proboscidea. They are cousins of elephants. So,
Yup.
like, once again, like the reptiles, basically every major group has gone back to the water to some degree, and many of them have made it to salt water
So we've talked about a whole lot of these trends in diversity and the adaptations and such. What else haven't we talked about? What else is there in terms of what trends we see in the evolution of these animals? I can think of one example that I know we have to talk about before we wrap up this episode.
So there are kind of two big things of one is if you're going back to the water, how you do it is determined by who your ancestors were.
Hmm.
And then the other is that we do tend to see general patterns in the adaptations that are acquired as we move more and more further and further into the water.
Okay.
The first and most obvious is that if you are a land animal and you're moving back to the water, different land animals move in different ways, and that's going to affect how you move in the water when you get there. The two big examples are that reptiles' spines tend to bend side to side because they move like a lizard, like a Komodo dragon, like a crocodile,
Right. Like a
where,
fish.
like a fish, snakes move their body that way. They are moving in a more ancestral tetrapod stance with the legs sprawled out to the side, if you have them, and the spine flexing left to right, side to side as they move and walk around. While mammals and some other animals like archosaurs, like dinosaurs, moved their limbs under the body and their spine became less flexible. And when it does flex, it tends to flex more up and down than
Hmm.
side to side. These differences in how they move on land are going to affect the way you start swimming because a bear swims differently than a lizard does. Like if you take a fully terrestrial brown bear and a skink that is not a water skink and you throw them into the water, they can both swim, but the skink swims like a crocodile and the bear swims like a dog and it doggy paddles. And that's one of the trends we tend to see. And it is often assumed and proposed that that is typically going to give you the best idea of what the ancestral swimming form was for secondarily aquatic tetrapods.
Yeah, this is why, generally speaking, marine mammals, when they have flattened tails, are flattened top and bottom
Yes.
because they move the tail up and down, right? Like a mermaid, it's moving up and down. Whereas crocodiles, the tail is flattened side to side, which is also what
Yes.
we see in ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs and fish, because that's how
Yes.
fish swim. Is you move side to side, mammals move up and down.
And so you tend to see more leaning toward the motion of movement, and you do tend to see that animals with reptile or reptile like ancestors, things that were shaped more like reptiles. So your
Right.
amphibians count in this too, that salamanders and so forth, they tend to rely on axial swimming more than limbed swimming. And you will get mammals that do that, that eventually end up with the whale form where you're using your spine to do your moving, but that more often with mammals we see more limb based swimming because that's how their
Yeah.
swimming started, was with paddling. They did not have a long tail to start with because most mammals do not have long powerful tails.
I was just going to make that point is that mammals tend not to have big tails,
Yes.
whereas reptiles do. Right? A fully terrestrial lizard still has a very substantial tail.
And the tail is a direct extension of the spinal cord with a lizard, while ours is it still is an extension of the spinal cord, but it's specialized and it's separated from the body trunk.
Yeah,
It doesn't continue the body, it is a separate limb now.
yeah, it's an attachment.
Yes. So it isn't going to be able to exert force on the body the same way until it's specialized. While a lizard's tail is good to swim with straight out of the box.
That's how they swim. That's how lizards swim.
Yes, it works really well, even when it's a rounded tail, even when it's not a hydrodynamic tail. So we tend to see that big difference, which means that when we see things like whales, they had to shift from limb swimming to tail swimming at some point in their evolution. And we do see examples where it seems like it might have gone the opposite way. Plesiosaurs, very famously, as we mentioned, have four big flippers. They also have very tiny little tails. They are
Hmm.
definitely not axial swimmers. They are not swimming with the tail. They are swimming with the limbs. But based off of their ancestry, they should have started as axial swimmers. They should have
Yeah.
started swimming with a tail like a lizard. So at some point, they switched from swimming like a lizard to swimming like a plesiosaur, which is potentially the only example we have of that in reptiles, of
Yeah,
shifting from the traditional movement to a more mammal-like movement.
because we also have turtles, right? Sea turtles
Yes.
are flipper swimmers, but that seems to be something that they did before they went into the water. Is that turtles got weird first
Yes.
in a way that because if you're a turtle, you can't flex your spine. Your spine is a shell.
Exactly. So they could not swim using their tail.
Yes.
They needed to swim with their limbs, so they were restricted by their anatomy.
Turtles are flipper swimmers for much the same reasons that snakes are spine swimmers.
Yes,
You
exactly.
did not have another option.
Yep. Yep. And we see a similar thing with birds because they also have a very unflexible body. Their body is very rigid.
Yep.
So they have to use their limbs to swim. So you do see some interesting contradictions to the ancestral trend, but typically the pattern in which you're going to be bending follows your ancestry more than anything else. I also did find some like proposed patterns that are probably the most common pattern to suspect. This is based off of evidence and also parsimonious, what makes the most sense as the pattern we would see. I found one for mammals and one for birds. I did not find one for reptiles, but we I've given them attention everywhere else in this podcast.
Well, also reptiles, it's just so easy. Outside of weird things like turtles, you put a lizard in the water and it swims the way that a marine reptile swims. They
Yep,
really do. In terms of locomotion, it takes very little to make a lizard and make a reptile an aquatic animal. You really
exactly.
just like maybe you shorten the legs, maybe you add some webbing to the hands, you flatten the tail, and you've pretty much done it.
They are so good in the water. It's ridiculous. I get a kick out of it every time I see a lizard jump into the water and then just start swimming, just
Yep.
start going.
And they do that. The legs go snap to the
Hmm.
side of the body like a croc, and then they just sort of undulate their way through the water. You're half fish already.
Absolutely. When we look at mammals, the typical ancestral state is going to be walking on all fours with the limbs underneath the body, so that when you swim, you're going to have to do the doggy paddle, basically moving your legs as if you were walking, but just pushing against the water instead of the ground. The next step along that route, as they become more semi aquatic, is typically going to shift to bipedal paddling, so using either the arms mainly or either the legs as their main paddling source, which
Hmm.
is useful because it avoids your front legs and back legs getting in each other's way in the turbulence they're creating. It also can free up things like free up the front hands like otters do to forage and to manipulate food
Yup.
or sense their environment. This is also when we would tend to expect to see adaptations to the limbs, them getting shorter and more robust and more rigid, fingers and toes getting longer for better propulsion, things like that. A next step would be things like non wettable fur, otter fur that is wet on the outside, dry on the inside, to better thermally insulate themselves and create better buoyancy control. As you start to see more need to dive, either foraging underwater or traveling underwater, this is when we think we would see a shift from the alternate paddling, like kicking our feet freestyle, to synchronized rowing, of
Hmm.
moving the limbs in sync to each other and rowing. We see this with otters that will kick their back feet in sync.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, actually, it's funny because if you watch sea lions and seals and otters, for example, they can do both. Where
Yes,
sometimes you will see them moving the limbs independently, and then when they really take off, they're rowing together.
exactly. And then eventually you will usually move to like the sea lion. When they use their front arms, they create thrust up and down on the upstroke and downstroke.
Yeah, like a
So
bird.
there is no wasted motion. There is a full underwater flying. So that would be the next step we'd expect to see is,
Hmm.
and then it shifts to blubber, loss of hair, and for some groups, a shift to a long, powerful tail instead of the back limbs being the new source of propulsion. Not all mammals are going to follow this pattern exactly, but some amount of these order of steps is what we would kind of expect to see for most secondarily aquatic mammals. Birds follow a similar pattern, but birds have two very distinct ways of moving in the water. So we can look at those in a bit more focused detail because, like, mammals move in very different ways. Whales are using their tail, sea lions are using their front fins, seals are using their back feet, and they're using them side to side in a weird way.
Hmm.
So you get a lot of different things. Birds, you've really got two options: feet or wings.
Yep. Because the body, again, we've talked about this before on the podcast. One of the things that is distinctive about birds is that so many of the bones of their torso are fused
Yep.
and rigid. Because if you're flying, you don't want that body to be flopping around.
Nope. Nope.
So now when you try to go in the water, you're just a rock with limbs.
Yes. And you got rid of your tail, so you can't even use that as an option.
Yes. So you're kind of in the same position turtles are in.
Yes. Exactly. So we tend to see back feet rowing or underwater flying with the wings.
Right. Ducks or penguins.
Yep. Penguins are the poster child of underwater flight. Like, if you look up underwater flight, they're going to come up before anyone else we've mentioned. They are incredibly efficient at this, so much so that they can launch themselves out of the water.
Yes.
We do tend to see trends. While a long wingspan is very efficient in the air, a short wingspan is preferred for flying underwater because that you just don't want to move a long oar through the water. You want to move a short, robust paddle because that's just too much force you're going to generate at the tip of the wing.
Yep.
Penguins have very short, stocky wings. Other seabirds that swim underwater that have still flight capable wings achieve this by folding the wings partway while flying underwater.
Yeah, they go into swimming mode.
Yes, they transform, turn their wings into paddles. There's potential like ways this could originate. Some may have developed it from the way birds swim at the surface. If you watch an eagle fall into the water after it's trying to catch a fish, they will paddle with both wings on the surface simultaneously, like a breaststroke, to push themselves to the edge of the water where they can get out. And that could eventually develop into the pattern you're using for swimming. That same sort of wing aided swimming can be seen in some foot paddlers, like some ducks, eider ducks, and streamer ducks, mainly propelling with the feet, but they will help with rowing of the wings. One of the reasons they got the name steaming is because when they're moving across the surface, it looks like the paddle wheels of a paddle boat, of them paddling across the surface to quickly move. And so you could see how either one of those wing rowing, instincts could then lead to aiding in movement while they're submerged, to then favoring the wings over the feet if they are paddling. This could also come from birds that plunge dive, like pelicans or gannets that
Mhm.
dive in from up top. Once they hit the water, they are carried under the water a bit, and some of them will continue to swim after prey with the wings. So there's a couple of different ways we could see this behavior of flying under the water come about and be evolved. Foot swimmers are pretty obvious in how that would go about because most birds, if you put them in water, kick with the back feet to swim because
Yep.
that's how you're going to do it if you're shaped like a bird.
You add some webbing, you turn
Yeah.
them into flippers, and now you're good.
Yeah, now you just have to be able to dive. This is a very ancestral thing for birds. There is evidence that's how theropod dinosaurs also swam, was with kicking back feet. So
Mhm.
very easy for them. As we see them become more swimming adapted, we tend to see the legs move more toward the back of the body to become a motor on the back instead of under the body.
Yeah, this is the shape that we see in, for example, Hesperornis.
Yes. Where if you see Hesperornis, like if it were to be put on land, it might not have been able to move on land very well because its legs were so far back.
Yeah, it kind of has the proportions of a long-necked frog.
Yes. Yep. And there are birds today, there are diving ducks that are very awkward on land because their legs are so far back on the body. You'll also see, similar to the mammals, that there is a shift. When ducks paddle on the surface, it's kick, 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 left, right, left, right, left, right. For diving birds, they often shift to a left, right at the same time,
Yeah.
simultaneous rowing with the back feet. And some specialized members can even get some lift based propulsion and be very efficient kickers and very
Cool.
efficient with the back legs. And once again, cormorants swim with alternating kicks on the surface and simultaneous kicks under the surface. So it is not a one size fits all, it is a situation by situation.
Thinking about these steps from, that on the path to becoming secondarily aquatic is really interesting because this is one of those great examples of an evolutionary transition where among modern animals we have examples of basically every conceivable step
Yes.
on the way, right, from horse to whale in
Yes,
terms
exactly.
of how adapted you are to ocean life.
Yeah, we see different members that are using the ocean to different degrees and in different respects. Things that are just beginning to use the ocean, like American alligators can swim out into salt water and even feed on animals there, but do not live there. They will return to freshwater, they will return to land still. You get examples where things are feeding out in the ocean. Saltwater crocodiles are a step further. Polar bears, where they are hunting,
Yup.
a marine life, even though they are
Yeah.
still directly tied to the land.
Marine iguanas are like that. They
Yep, yep.
hang out on land, but to get their food, they go underwater and they eat algae.
Yes. With those are both also good examples of like one of the next steps on the line, which is starting to handle salt water. Marine iguanas have
Hmm.
salt glands. Polar bears can get metabolic and dietary water from what they eat and their metabolism. You get examples where now you start using the land less and less. Sea otters spend most of their time at sea and really only come on land to dry their fur from time to time and bask. Seals and sea lions do the similar thing where they are mostly just coming on land to rest. Sea krates are still depending on like terrestrial sources of water at times and like coming on land to reproduce, but you're spending the vast majority of your time in the water. And then eventually you lose your terrestrial features.
Right.
You either can't move on land really anymore, or you can't you don't need to come out of land to bask yourself or keep your metabolism or reproduce. You start losing things like fur and stuff. These are whales, sea turtles, all of
Hmm.
those where they really don't need the land for their own survival, except for maybe some exceptions like sea turtles needing to lay their eggs there, but the sea turtle doesn't need the land, their eggs do.
Yeah. If whales could evolve cutaneous respiration
Mhm.
to get oxygen from the water, they'd be done.
Yes.
They could just never see the air ever again.
Yeah, they'd be good. They would just be big fish. We do see some trends along all of these that like we tend to see a more increase in carnivorous diet, that
Hmm.
not as many marine herbivores and fully aquatic herbivores because plants aren't as dominant in the ocean as they are on land.
Not a lot of plants, and it's hard to eat algae.
Yep. And so you if you do that, you can only do that in shallow water. Like
Yes.
cuz that's where photosynthesis can happen. You also tend to see, like we mentioned, things getting bigger. We tend to
Hmm.
see, shifts from the dragging, paddling like motions to more lift based efficient motions. A lot of these also seem to follow what's called Dolo's law, which is that many of these features seem that once you evolve them, you can't evolve out of it. That and because a lot of these features are losing things, losing fur, reducing the back limbs. So once you have evolved fully into aquatic, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that you can't really backtrack out of it and go
Hmm.
back to being terrestrial. But there is some evidence that's very interesting that for the groups that reach those like last steps of being fully aquatic and like fully marine, those groups tend to be more diverse than the semi-aquatic lineages.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like flight.
Yes.
You developed a new superpower, and now you can explode and explore those niches.
Yeah. There's an interesting trend where semi-aquatic phases are reached by a wider variety of lineages. Like that has been reached many, many, many times, but none of those lineages are typically super diverse and don't diversify once they reach
Yes.
semi-aquatic.
it's like comparing flyers to gliders.
Exactly.
Lots of groups have evolved gliding, and they tend to be relatively small groups.
Yes, but the groups that have made it to full aquatic and full marine then diversify. And so it is this interesting trend. And that when we look at like the evolutionary record, like gliders, those that don't reach those final levels early tend to die out and not leave modern lineages, like not leave lasting lineages. It seems like if you are going to go full marine, it needs to happen fairly early in your evolution. Otherwise, you're just not going to get there.
Yeah, fascinating. A very cool evolutionary topic. It really has worked out well that we left this until way later in the history of the
Mhm.
podcast, partially because we've already done episodes about most of these major semi-aquatic groups. Also, I'm not sure we would have done this topic early in the podcast history because
Mm-mm.
it feels like a little bit of an unusual, even though it is kind of like the evolution of flight, which was one of our very earliest episodes, but there's only 4 examples to talk about
Yeah.
with that. So that's way easy. This is like 40 examples, and
Yep.
it's much more difficult. Well, before we wrap everything up, we do have some patron questions that are on topic to continue our discussion about aquatic adaptations. One of the rewards that patrons can get on our Patreon is the ability to submit questions for us to answer here on the podcast. Let's go through. We got a bunch here. This first one is a question that was largely addressed in the discussion. Krista asked, in regards to this trend of swimming reptiles moving their tails side to side and mammals moving their tails up and down, are there any counterexamples to this trend apparent in the fossil record or in modern groups?
There are some examples that seem to be, counter to this. The two that come to mind for modern ones are muskrats have flattened tails that are flattened like a lizard's tail would be.
Mm-hmm.
And though they are kicking their feet and moving their body very much up and down, the tail will move side to side. And it does seem like it provides some propulsion, but it is not their main source.
Yeah,
And then the other example is seals kick
right.
their feet side to side. Now they're not undulating the whole body side to side like a shark or a crocodile, but their propulsion is left to right with the back feet, each one kicking in alternation to the other. So that is a different mode of swimming than we see in any other mammal I can think of.
Yeah. The only other example that comes to mind is swimming birds like penguins
Mhm.
do kind of move up and down
Yes.
when they swim. They have kind of, because they're flying, right? And
Yep.
that's how you move when you fly as a bird. So they also are kind of going up and down, sort of like mammals.
Mhm.
They, of course, are not using their tails.
Yes, exactly. So theirs is more in the limbs, less in the spine, and that would also be true for like foot rowing birds that they're going to be kicking up and down, but
Yes.
it's not because the spine's moving that way.
On a similar note, a question from Ryan who asks, if a dinosaur had become fully aquatic and used its tail for propulsion, unlike birds, of course, which are not using their tails,
Mhm.
would it more likely have moved the tail side to side or up and down? This is a great question because, as you mentioned, dinosaurs have that legs under the body set up similar to mammals.
Yes, exactly. And I did see some references that their spine does adopt more of an up and down movement compared to ancestral reptiles. But from the evidences we have, Spinosaurus's tail, which does seem like it is paddle adapted, that it is adapted
Hmm.
for moving water, whether or not this was a fully swimming, like a croc dinosaur or just moving through shallow water from spot to spot, its tail is flattened like a croc's or a lizard's would be.
Yeah, side to side.
Seems like it would be swimming side to side, so that's at least one bit of evidence that they would swim side to side. I tried to look up of how flexible are dinosaur skeletons, and I did find that like one study looking at protoceratops found that they do have more flexibility side to side than comparable mammals. So it does seem like dinosaurs still have a more flexible skeleton than mammals do in the left to right direction.
Yeah, and just kind of off the top of my head, I could be wrong about this, but I feel like research that I've read that has looked into right the motion of dinosaur tails or necks tend to have them moving more side to side than up and down.
Yeah.
That like the tail seems to have been able to bend side more than it could bend up and down.
Yeah, so probably the tail would be going side to side, though if I were to like speculate on a fully aquatic theropod, I would expect we would probably get something very bird like and kicking with those back powerful legs.
Yes, like a T-Rex would be foot propelled, at
Yes.
least to start with.
Yeah, and that very likely could be where they ended up of just having diving duck back legs for powering
Yeah,
themselves through the water.
like Hesperornis.
Yeah, exactly. And the tail might just be a rudder.
Well, on the note of speculating about things, one more question. This one's also from Ryan, very much on topic. Ryan says, all flying tetrapods started out as terrestrial animals, as far as I know. That is true. Could you speculatively evolve a flying tetrapod from a secondarily aquatic animal?
That's a very interesting one. And it's one that things have like looked at. Like the Future is Wild had the flish, the flying fish
Yeah.
birds.
And that is my first instinct is to go with something like flying fish or
Hmm.
those rays that jump up out of the water.
Yep, yep, yep.
Although the question does say from a secondarily aquatic animal.
Yes. So the main issue you'd be fighting against is what we mentioned earlier with the underwater flying birds, that the wings that are good for water are not the same shape as the wings good for air.
Hmm.
And you would need a animal with underwater flippers to start developing a flipper that is better while they're in the air, which if they were going like a flying fish route, if it was like a really, a small individual that could jump and glide to escape stuff, then that would help. But then you run into the issue of most secondarily aquatic animals are not tiny.
Yes. The main example that comes to mind, like the first one that's like, if I was going to do one, is penguins.
Mhm.
In part because they are one of the only examples of a secondarily aquatic tetrapod that thrust themselves out of the water.
Yes, via
That
their flapping
Yes.
arms.
And so I guess you could get a lineage like that that starts gliding like flying fish if they
Mhm.
leave the land behind altogether and now they're gliding over the waves. And then they are kind of in a nice position because they already have a lot of the adaptations that are good for flight
Yes.
because
Yep.
that would be a case of a lineage evolving from terrestriality to flight, back to terrestriality to being aquatic, and then back to flying.
Yep. I think another issue though with like that route is, as we mentioned in the gliding episode, we don't see evolution from glider to flyer very often.
Yeah, that's true.
Like we don't have any for sure examples of any of our flighted tetrapods that's the route they went. It doesn't seem like most of them were gliders. It seems like they were flappers for some reason and using that, which you could still get that they were like flapping through the air, but it's they would have to like re-evolve foldable wings that they could fold up while swimming. So
Yeah.
it's it and like I said, once again, you'd need to be small enough to get airborne, and that then fights against the thermoregulation of it's fine to be a tiny fish because your body temperature is the same as the ocean, so you're fine. But if you put a mouse in the ocean, it's just going to lose all its body heat and die of hypothermia
Hmm.
because it's so small. Like we don't see tiny marine animals, marine tetrapods. Basically, like the smallest ones are like sea otters and the small penguins, and
Yeah.
those are still pretty big.
So I guess our best bet might be a species of small tropical penguins
Yep, yep, yep.
that live in like tropical shallow seas that thrust themselves out of the water to escape predators and then extend their wings to glide better
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually flap.
Mm-hmm.
And since they already have all of the musculature and bone structure that is good for flying, they might be able to get some more air mobility again.
Yeah.
That's my best thought in the brief time to answer a patron question.
I think that is the best we can do right now, because it's a tricky one. There's a lot working against you to get back out of the water into the air. What we really need it to be is that they just develop back in terrestrial animals, and then their descendants evolve into new flighted animals.
Yes. Which is something that we didn't mention in this episode, is that there aren't any definitive examples of tertiarily terrestrial, or I guess secondarily terrestrial, right? That you became secondarily aquatic and then went back onto land. There are some potential examples of semi-aquatic animals doing that. We've talked about that with sea snakes, that sea snakes might have had a semi-aquatic ancestor at one point, then became terrestrial, and then some of those became sea snakes, right? From the Australasian lineage.
There are some crocs later on terrestrial, it seems, crocs, or like more terrestrial, that definitely had semi-aquatic ancestors, but they were still probably very good in the water, just better on land than an alligator.
So give it a couple hundred more million years of evolution, and we'll see. We'll have pinnipeds that evolve back into fully terrestrial and then fly.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you to Krista and Ryan for those questions. Patrons, if you have a question that you'd like to ask us, and you are at the requisite levels on Patreon, submit those questions through the question form.
Yeah. This was a fun episode. I liked getting to learn about the trends of all of these adaptations.
Yes, and very cool.
The way that the animals get back into the water, it was very satisfying. If we did not mention your favorite example of semi-aquatic animals or secondarily aquatic animals, please let us know. Check out the blog post to see pictures and links and examples. Remember that the end of the year Q&A form is still open for a little bit longer, so check in. You got about a week left from the airing of this episode, so check that out. Thank you again to everyone who requested this episode and our new patrons. And tippy top thank you to our top tier patrons, Sarah May, Jeff Ellington, and Danielle the Bug Lover. And with that, we will wrap up this episode. Another foray into the ocean.
Yes. If you haven't already, go check out the many episodes that we have done already about secondarily aquatic groups of tetrapods. And if there is a group of secondarily aquatic tetrapods we haven't done an episode about that you'd like to hear, let us know. Submit it in the topic form on our website.
Absolutely. And other than that, we release episodes every fortnight.
Sure do.
And I don't have any.
And bye.
It's everyone back into the pool.
No, I got nothing. It's 2 now. We've run out. We run out of things to talk about.
Used up all our clever.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.